Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'd like to call this administrative committee meeting to order. And thank you, Chair, the council's chair. I'd like to call this meeting to order and welcome everyone here this morning. I'd like to now ask a motion for approval of the agenda.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. We're now down to citizens' comments.
Madam Chair, nobody signed up for citizens' comments and nobody submitted any email or online comments.
All right, thank you. We're now down to item 4, approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes from February 11, 2020?
So move. Second.
All in favor? Motion carries. We're now down to discussion action item 5. A, fiscal year 2020-2021 general fund budget.
Madam Chair, as we mentioned yesterday, if we could, I'd like to request we do item C first because Kathy has another meeting to attend.
All right. Do we have to put that in the form of a motion or just?
This is just a committee meeting, so
Okay, so we don't have
your
to.
approval is all we need.
All right. So, Kathy, is it Kathy?
Yes, ma'am. Kathy's going to come up and present what information we have on the Kershaw Library, which admittedly at this point is not much. We do have investigations underway with both the architect and Mitch Lucas with the town of Kershaw has their engineering folks involved. Just as a recap, the original plan was to put the meeting room underneath the drive-in area at the new Kershaw Library. As they got working out there, and lo and behold, it turns out the town of Kershaw has a sewer line they didn't know anything about. And we can't build a building on a sewer line. So we are investigating options at this point, and then have asked Kathy to just basically kind of brief counsel where we are, but we're not to the point yet of knowing what's this going to cost financially, what's it going to cost as far as additional time for the project. Which option may be the most feasible and wise choice to make, whether partnering with the town on the sewer line or just redesigning the library. So at this point, Kathy?
Well, like he said, I did get a little more information yesterday afternoon. We don't have any numbers back from Kershaw on the actual cost to move the sewer line. I've got numbers, and these are all rough numbers. The contractor gave me numbers on putting the meeting room at one end of the building, which is what you have here. I just got this back from the architect yesterday. This is basically option A. It's just a rough sketch they came up with. The additional cost, and these are without elevations, without the cost of demoing the canopy. We discovered that the HVAC, we knew they were there, but none of us thought it would impact this. But all the HVAC systems are in the canopy, so they would have to be relocated if we demo the canopy. The rough cost to move the meeting room would be around $150,000. And that could, could go north or south of that. The additional cost to the architectural firm to redraw the plans would be about $20,000. We're looking at an additional 24 to 30 weeks added to the project. It would have to completely go back through the plan review process because we are changing the plans so much. We're changing parking spaces because where we would be putting the meeting room is gonna take away parking spaces. The time for the builders to finish the project, they're estimating about 16 weeks because they're not gonna, even if we start now, there's no way they could get finished with the drawings and then be able to complete the meeting room before they're finished with the building. So they'll move on to something else and have to remobilize back to the Kershaw branch. The permitting process is going to take an additional 4 to 6 weeks, and the design, we're looking at about 4 weeks. So right now we're looking at roughly, and these numbers, like I said, do not include any cost to demo or upfit the canopy in any way. It's basically leaving it as is, or to move the HVAC. If we leave the canopy, we don't have the HVAC cost, other than what it's gonna cost to add the HVAC systems to the meeting room on the end of the building if we choose to go that route. But, we will have things like the concrete under the canopy is tore up. They took the covering off the post so that they could start building around it, and they had already taken out part of the ceiling. So that would have to be repaired, which would be nominal compared to, everything else we're doing. But that's about all we're looking at upwards of $200,000 extra to move the meeting room. And the deduct, I asked yesterday, if there would be a deduction for not building the meeting room at all, and they're estimating between $75,000 and $100,000.
Any questions?
Where is the sewer line at on this drawing?
It goes right through. It starts at this side of the building, which is
Is this where the meeting room's plan on going now?
no, the meeting room is actually, if you're standing at the front of the building,
All right,
like you're holding it, the meeting room is supposed to go back here where the drive-through was.
all right, and the sewer line is
The
under
sewer
the
line
drive?
starts over here on this street and goes right through the middle of where
No,
the meeting room is
it
going.
doesn't go right through the middle. It goes about 5 feet off the building.
Right.
Now, Kathy, I mean, it doesn't really matter one way or another whether it's middle or the other. But Steve, the problem is this is an old sewer line. Because my recommendation was gonna be to build over it, because I know we could bridge over it, but the problem, because if it does, malfunction one day, they're gonna have to replace it anyway. But once they start construction, if they did start construction over this sewer line, it would collapse it anyway, so.
Well, it's already pretty much collapsed. They cut water on in the old bank building, which is across the street from the library, and it took 45 minutes for water to get from that bank building to the manhole on the opposite side of the Wells Fargo building.
Is
And
it an
should
active
take about
line?
5 minutes.
Well, no, I disagree with that, but, that, to the left of that building you're talking about is a beauty salon, and they're
It's not on this one.
they told me it was.
They told us it wasn't.
Yeah, well, anyway, that, they told me it was. So, be that as it may, there is a guy down in Kershaw who can do this work. The Kershaw, and Kathy, I don't know if you know this or not, so this might all be new to Kathy. He, the public works guy at the town of Kershaw said it could be considered a repair, so we could avoid engineering cost. We asked him to give us a price on moving it. But then
We who?
wait,
You said we.
Mayor Dorman and myself have met down there a couple of times. And so the guy wants $500 to do an estimate. He didn't want to waste his time doing an estimate, was going to go to bid and things like that. So therein, we could get an estimate to do that. The only other problem is we would have to look at how close to the railroad tracks, and are we going to infringe on the right of way before?
We will be. If we build it outside of the footprint of the building, actually, the right-of-way goes inside the footprint of the building just a little bit.
Okay, good
I don't know
answer.
the exact measurements, but
So, I think two things could happen. We could explore with the railroad whether or not they would give us or give the town a chance for a right-of-way. Because my thoughts were, let the town keep the sewer line, and we just provide the funding in order not to pay the additional cost of moving the meeting room. So, all we gotta do is see if there's a positive thought by the railroad to let us encroach. If it's not, then we gotta abandon it anyway. But if they were to say, hey, it's positive possibly, meet us out there, that kind of thing, we could pay this guy $500 to give us a,
It's
give us an
it's
estimate.
certain procedures we have to go through. I don't think we could, do, I don't know, but having somebody to do a job for $500 just to, save money, I'm sure it's certain guidelines we gotta go through. Even for him to do that. Is it, Steve?
I'm presuming the town would be paying that, because it's their line.
Yeah, so they'll take care of that part, because we don't wanna
I
put.
presume so, but I don't know so.
But let finish out the story, Charlene, is we sit there and we see if the railroad has an appetite to move it. If they don't, it's over with anyway. If they do, I think the town could get us a price on moving the line, and then we can see what that price is, compare it to this price that we've already got potentially, to see what the better outcome is. Now, two other things, the high-vac system sitting up there looks like it's causing that roof to sag where it sits now.
That's gonna be repaired, that's part of the
Okay,
construction.
so, well, that's good, and then the other part is, if we did decide to go to the side with the meeting room, why do we have to destroy the canopy? Why could we not just go ahead, shore it up, keep it there, pour concrete underneath it, put some banisters around it, and have an outdoor reading room?
That was one of the options. We're already, since it's already been cut out, was supposed to be a storefront door going in right there. And they're gonna go ahead and install that door. And that was one of the options that we had talked about, but we gotta get to a place where we can make that decision
Yeah,
first.
or could it be a portico?
But now, we did talk about the right-of-way with the railroad and just moving the sewer line over. And Mitch gave us the indication that they wouldn't deal with them at all if it was in the right-of-way. He said the old L&C would, but the new one won't. And so he basically shot down that idea. That was one of our first questions.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, I'd like to ask her a question.
Okay,
You ready? All right, first question, is this an actual active sewer line? Apparently it's not, because if solid waste was going through there, it wouldn't be
Well,
working.
the bank building that is attached to it there's nobody in it.
Okay.
And they're not even 100% sure, unless they've done camera work since I've talked to them, that bank goes in, well, we are now, because we got water to come out of it.
It seems to me that there's a simple, a lot cheaper solution. We would know the elevation of the sewer lines, what it would have to be coming from the bank building, and where it comes out on the other side. You could stub sewer lines, you could move it over and put a new sewer line under this building. A solid pipe or whatever, I would think would work, or would utilities not allow it to go under that building?
have we looked at other options, other than, moving the?
You see what I'm talking about? Run you know, I put sewer under every house I build, and there's sewer under these buildings. You might have to put a clean out somewhere. How wide is this canopy and all, approximately?
30 feet, 25, 30 feet?
Yeah, but how wide? How wide would the drive-through be? What would this thing
the
be
drive-through.
scaled?
25, 30 feet.
Steve, you asked how long is the sewer line under the canopy? How many linear
It
feet?
goes, and what I'm saying is go somewhere else and stub, put a sewer line under the new building in the same elevation that sewer line is, so you could, if they ever get the bank building, you're gonna have to build a new sewer line anyway, or the city is. They're not gonna be able to use that.
Yeah, I mean,
It would be a lot cheaper just to put a new line under here, for several $1,000s than it would be to redesign the whole project.
Have we looked at that option?
We have, and Kershaw basically has every idea that we've had. And granted, we just talked to Mitch Lucas. I think you've talked to
I
Mayor
mentioned to
Dorman
Mark
just
just
a
real
little
briefly
bit,
one
but not
time,
a
but
lot.
we're trying to keep in mind, Kershaw
Have you
calls
posed
the
that
shots on the sewer
option
line.
to 'em?
what?
When you talked to the mayor, have you posed the option of replacing the sewer line?
Yeah, that's what I was working on.
Yeah.
But we'd have to move it outside the footprint of the building, and we would be encroaching into railroad right away.
Which,
Mitch
said you
was
won't
not
put-
with us when we met, so this is news to me that Mitch says the railroad wouldn't do it. You know,
No, well, yeah, Mitch was the one that
they're,
said,
they're,
and he said that, I mean, he was almost totally against everything we came up with. We had engineers, we had.
all right, here's my concern too, that, I was kinda hoping we could go down the line of moving it, because the old bank building, the two-story one to the left, that's gonna be the 4K, what's it called, First Steps.
First steps.
And that building is on this sewer line. So regardless of what we do, if we don't do anything, we're tapped in to that sewer line with the Wells Fargo building. So that's a given. That building's tapped into that sewer line. And so if we go off to the side and build, that's fine. But one day, that line is gonna collapse.
And we pointed that out to them.
Those manholes are brick manholes, Steve. They're not the prefabricated kind.
So
So
there's
what-
terracotta pipe.
Yes, terracotta pipe.
It's terracotta
This
pipe.
is hooked onto terracotta.
Wells
This
Fargo,
building is.
the Wells Fargo building is hooked onto the terracotta pipe.
Where's the sewer come out on Wells Fargo, on the back?
Comes out on the back. If you're,
Goes
Where you
into,
see the
Goes
restrooms
through
are,
about,
Steve, right, if you're looking at it
upper
right
left
here,
corner.
it comes right out here. That's where the tap is according to their,
record.
now according to their, maintenance, what do you call it, maintenance guy, engineer guy, not
Yeah.
engineer, but.
What if, there's so many what ifs, we don't have enough information. What if we, have Steve to talk to Mitch to see about, the option of, getting that right away? Because apparently, we're hearing two different things, is that the mayor's telling you one thing and
No, the mayor-
Mitch is saying one thing and the mayor's agreeing.
Well, no, what the mayor and I were planning to do is get a price and see if that was palatable.
And
I mean,
that's what
if-
we're doing.
I'm
We're just,
talking about
we don't have
building.
it yet.
I'm talking about the sewer line.
Is he gonna pay for an estimate? See, it looked at me, I think it died, but I could be wrong. We'll take a break and I'll call him in a little bit and see.
I mean, but, my position would be, we don't own the line. We can't say what's gonna happen to that sewer line.
Well, we
County
can have a
Kershaw's gotta
discussion
make
as
that
with
decision.
Mitch to see what's going on, because
Right.
Mitch is saying one thing and, we wanna move in a certain direction, so.
I'm not in favor of spending $200,000 to add a building, or a room on the end, whereas say, moving a sewer line will be,
50,000.
Yeah.
10 to 20% of that cost,
Yeah.
one way or the other. We're gonna have to work out the details.
And Veronica, if by chance we would say we wanna move forward to $200,000 to, where are we at with the funding on that?
Glad you asked that question, because cash flow is a concern.
As Steve stated, cash flow is a concern, and the reason is because, even though we expect to have surplus from the funding, we don't know how much. And given the economic climate right now, we really don't know how much. And then, Jeff has begun his work on finalizing his, roads list. So he's already about to let out that work, and that's about $7 million. So the funding, as far as any excess, I'm running kind of low after he gets done with his work, because I gotta make sure that the bond payments are taken care of.
Okay.
But the thing about this
Second,
is,
third
if we're talking about 200,000 versus 7 million, road construction is gonna go on forever. So if we end up doing 6.8 million, no?
No, Jeff can speak to this because I've asked him how long it will take, and he's expecting to start and be done by the fall.
But
You're talking about we're gonna start and spend $7 million by fall?
Contracted out.
your roads are expensive.
I know they are. But I'm just saying we could do less roads to escrow back the money, because we only got one chance to get the library right.
That's why we need to figure out this option about the sewer lines before we can move forward to make a decision. Because if we can settle it another way, we don't need to look at $200,000.
Madam Chairman, can I make?
we're investigating that, but we just don't have the information yet.
Steve has a motion. What's the
Can
motion?
there's just, I recommend that we allot the money to have, a contractor give us an estimate on the sewer. But that has to go before full council, doesn't it, or can we?
If it's $500, I can handle that, but I need to make sure the admin committee's clear. What we would be doing is, we would not be engaging an engineer to work on somebody else's line. We would be engaging the town of Kershaw and say, Mitch, we'll fund $500 for you to pick your engineer to look at your line.
'Cause
Well-
we don't need to stop construction, because if you know, this thing is already underway, and you're talking about, if you have to move it, what were you saying, 2 to 3 months delay?
Yeah.
At least?
At least.
At least.
Well,
So
Steve,
you got to go back through planning and everything.
Steve Willis, do you recommend having a conversation with Mitch before we do this motion to figure out what's going on? Because if they need to pay that for that or do whatever they need to do, and not have us to pick up the debt.
Well, based on, what I think the committee's probably gonna recommend here, and I don't know, you need to have a vote to kind of see where this is going. I'll talk to Mitch and say, Mitch, we'll contribute up to $500 to have your engineer take a look at what would it take to relocate the line or look at other options, because we think that's gonna be cheaper than us moving rooms around.
Okay, and that was a recommendation, not a motion, right?
I mean, you just need a.
Because we can do just a recommendation to Steve to talk to.
But I still would like, if that fails, for us to push back some of the road construction, at least a couple $100,000 of road construction from this sales tax bond money.
That will have to go to full council, and, that's nothing that,
But we can make a recommendation now to push that to
I
full
don't think,
council.
you can make that motion, but I don't think we have enough information yet to make a motion about deferring, money from one, project to another.
If we don't act now,
But we got Friday, we'll be here May 8th.
we also have, that's true. Jeff, can you hold off till May the 8th?
The contracts have been signed for the road work.
But, and Alan, this is one of the options that we have, is if we don't have an answer before they finish with the interior of the building, because they're not stopping on the interior. We can go back later on, the way they're constructing it, we can go back and put the meeting room on.
Well, and we can also use some of the bond money that we have not yet shifted completely from the maintenance facility. We moved some of that money to fund the EMS headquarters, but there's still money left over from that bond issue, right, Steve?
There is some balance, that takes an ordinance and full council action.
Where we at on that balance, Veronica?
2.75, about 1.4, I believe,
That's the balance?
the balance. Yes.
Is it unfunded, is it targeted
Undesignated.
yet or restricted to another project?
No, we're
Mm-hmm.
part of it too.
Had we not wanted to target some of that money toward another project?
It's been
that we
talked
talked
about, but
about.
council
Been
has
talked
not made a
about, yeah.
decision on that. Been talked about potentially for land acquisition on Kershaw-Camden Highway, but council has not made a decision yet on that.
And of course, if we're gonna use that source, we need to get with Franny just to make sure.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, I still have an issue. They might not want it to go under there, but you can build a new manhole on one end of that building, you can build a new manhole on the other end of that building. You can put an 8-inch sleeve in there, and you can put a 4-inch sewer pipe inside that, and that thing will be there 200 years from now. I mean, there are other options in Kershaw. I mean, we if they want this library completed, which I wanted, I pushed for this. I pushed for this location because this is the best. This is the showplace for Kershaw, but there's somebody's going to have to use common sense, and spending $200,000 to put a meeting room on the end of a building where the only problem we're trying to solve is a 25-foot sewer line that's outdated. I have an issue with making that kind of financial commitment when there are other alternatives with a little bit of common sense that will work and will never cause problems for anybody.
Steve, why don't you go back, talk to Mitch, Kathy, y'all look at some other options, things that we can actually, deal with, some amounts that we can deal with, Steve, and come up and let's put it on the agenda for Friday. At that point, you may have more, or do you need more time? Y'all look
We
at,
may not, that's pretty quick to get an engineer out there and looking at all that. It may be for the end of May.
well, just give us an update at our May 8th meeting of where we're at.
That's kind of where we were today, just kind
Yeah,
of, here's what
because
we're
it's
looking
too
at, but
much-
we don't have information yet to bring y'all options.
We're basically
question.
waiting on Kershaw.
It's too much
I
ifs
would-
and
I would
options and
like
what
to-
ifs,
Yeah, and I
so-
would like to sit down with Mark and Mitch together, because I think there's some confusion there.
Mr. Willis, could you arrange a meeting with, Mr. Chairman, may I ask that,
you certainly can.
that the administrator arrange a meeting with, the town administrator and the mayor and Mr. Blackman and myself?
All right, can you move
Their
forward with
utility
that?
people. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that's fine.
And,
That works for
let's
you,
get this
Alan.
thing worked out.
Well,
'cause
everybody
we're
on
gonna
the
get
same
into
page.
Delays and like I say, if you go go back through the system, it's gonna take months and the contractor's gonna be gone and they're gonna have to,
Rescheduling.
yeah, they're gonna have to come back, and I think this can be worked out with some common sense.
Yeah, but understand, we got a library down there now that's operating. So even if this gets delayed 6 months, it's better to delay it 6 months and get it right than it is to hurry through. But yeah, we'll get a joint meeting and then we'll just see what else we can find out about the alternatives.
Okay,
All right?
all righty. We're now down to fiscal year 2020, 2021 general fund budget, Steve.
Yes, ma'am. Madam Chairman, members of the Administration Committee. Have a couple of brief comments, kind of the 30,000-foot view, and at which point I'll turn it over to Kim. Certainly want to commend her and her team for some excellent work they've done on the budget, because what you're looking at is budget 2.0. The original budget that we spent a lot of time working with the department heads, division heads, and thought we had a real good plan, about the middle of March went poof. And so everything you're seeing today is budget 2.0, which was put together pretty rapidly, but I would note pretty effectively. Just a couple of highlights real quick. The proposed fiscal year 2021 budget is going to look amazingly like the fiscal year 1920 budget. If you liked what we did last year, you're going to love next year. In spite of everything that's transpired in the last couple of months, would note that we remain in sound financial shape and prepared to weather this storm. And a lot of that goes back to some fine work done by the finance staff and council members in the past years. We have adequate reserves, a strong financial plan, AA bond rating. That said, doesn't mean next year's going to be a cakewalk. It won't. It's going to be ugly. We're going to have to make some hard decisions, but we'll get through this. The proposed budget carries forward our commitment to maintain quality service to our citizens, at the same time recognizing the financial conditions that we're going to face over the next year. One of the things that we talked about early on as a staff and also with the members of the Administration Committee, we're going to be proposing a budget that does not have a millage increase for next year. Council has been very, very proactive in doing what they could for our businesses and our residents. Delaying collection of certain local taxes, delaying business personal filing fees, looking at delaying reassessment for 1 year. And this would carry forward in council doing what they could for our business and our citizens. We do have some growth, and that's going to be nice. It's going to help cover some expenses that we just can't control. For example, health insurance. State health plan went up. Kim can cover that. I think it was like 6.7%, somewhere in that neighborhood. That's the base amount that went up statewide, because council and staff a couple of years, 5 years ago now, We funded the county nurse. It's been an amazingly successful program. It's really helped hold down our exposure. We don't have an experience modifier increase on top of the base. We just have the base increase. Again, that's something that was done in the past that's helping now. Detention center, food and medical care is going to go up. Obviously, with the population being down right now, it's down, but I don't anticipate that staying that way forever. Hospital security has gone up. One of the things, just a sign of the times, we're seeing a lot more of the mental patients and chemical abuse patients being committed at the hospital. We're to the point now, our budget next year is just under $1 million for security of those patients while they're waiting on beds, which the state doesn't adequately fund. So we've got to pay, in essence, to babysit them. And I know that's amazingly expensive, but it's far cheaper than what it would cost to have deputies over there doing that. And we're very, very thankful the hospital, Springs Memorial originally, and now MUSC Lancaster has worked with us to have their private security fund that. And I would note that while we're funding the security end, the hospital is still eating the cost of room, board, meals, nursing care, while these patients are awaiting a bed at a hospital. And back in the day when I was a police officer, we took folks over there. The doctor examined them. If they needed to go to Columbia, we loaded them up in the car right then and there, took them to Columbia, R&E on Bull Street, and they held them and took care of them. The state doesn't do that anymore. They've cut the budgets. They just don't do that. One of the things we'll talk a little bit about when we get into this, but this is just a note. We're going to have to look at it during the coming year. I think we're going to be working with I&R on this, is our solid waste cost. It's going up. We're hitting new fees. One that Jeff just brought to our attention that's going to be a new one. Disposal of mattresses, $25 each. So we're starting to get some of the commodities, and this is on top of the fact that our recyclable commodities, there is no market for those anymore. So a lot of what we used to recycle is now just going to the landfill. But we're getting to the point with volume and just our mechanisms. We're on the cusp of going to 100,000 people. Our methodology and the cost of handling solid waste, we're going to have to change in the next year or two. In the coming fiscal year, we're going to continue to review how we provide service to our citizens. We've made great strides over the last couple of months, moved up some things that we're looking at for the next year or two, but with the pandemic, looking at how we provide service to our citizens, we've made great strides. The Register of Deeds by June should be entirely online. The assessor's office shortly after that. Procurement, so Evolve is one that has been underway for about 2 years. Thank goodness we had that underway before all this hit. But again, looking at how can we provide services to our citizens without having them physically in the building. It's going to make it easier on them, make it more easy on our folks. And when the second wave of this hits, and it's coming, just a question of when, we'll be much better prepared than we were this time. During the coming fiscal year, probably going to be involved in the admin committee regularly on just monitoring our financial status, because that's something we're going to have to watch during the coming year. Perhaps the rebound in economy will allow us to address some issues that we're putting off, but that's one we need to watch, what trends are and what the future may bring. As I noted, we're in a good position now, courtesy of past councils and staff being conservative on finances. This is not the time to change that. I know that a lot of times you see more spending in situations like this, but we're going to have to be strategic in what are we spending on. Final thing in closing before I turn it over to Kim, the budget book that you have in front of you includes a 2% cost of living adjustment for employees. I am requesting that be deferred until later in the budget year. So so we can see what's gonna happen. This is a very, very tight budget. If things go south and the economy does not rebound, that's gonna be some of our wiggle room and hopefully avoid having to take personnel actions later in the fiscal year. I'd much rather hold off on a cost of living adjustment and have some cushion to see what's gonna happen. If the economy rebounds and things look like they're looking up, we can probably take a look at maybe doing something in January. But that is my recommendation, that even though it's in here, we delay implementation, because as Kim will cover, this is a very, very tight budget. We don't have a lot of wiggle room. In the past, it might be tight. We would routinely budget fund balance to help balance the budget and then never use it, because we would have excess funding coming in, whether it was through sales tax, building permits, planning permits, things of that nature. I don't see that in the coming fiscal year.
So, how much would that 2%, how much is that in the budget, Cam?
I'll let Kim cover the details, Madam Chair. If y'all don't mind, I guess we'll go ahead and, Veronica, I don't know if you have any opening comments, if you want to turn it over to Kim.
Yes, I do.
Okay. And I believe you're going to start with the revenue first and then move into expense.
Okay. Before Kim starts with the revenue, I just want council to know that we are in a COVID-19 recession, which is different from the recession of 2007, 2008. So there's a lot of unknown when it comes to the revenues. It's just unknown all the way across the board. So the figures that we're providing are to the best of our knowledge. We don't have a looking glass. We can only go by the past history and the data and kind of be more conservative than before. Just to let you know that I was on a conference call with Standard & Poor's, which is one of the bond rating companies, and they are watching. They have released a negative outlook on local governments, I guess nationwide, and that's because they're monitoring the situation and the recession that we're in. And they're going to be looking at the local governments on how they manage during this recession. They're going to be looking at how you manage your liquidity, your cash. They're going to be looking at how you manage your fund balance. So just to make council aware, or the committee aware, that the bond and credit rating companies are watching to see what we do.
Veronica, before you pass the mic, could you fill in the committee? Y'all are participating in the GFOA Fiscal First Aid series.
Yeah, Kim and I have been doing a lot of researching. I've been on a lot of webinars. The good thing is that GFOA is offering a lot of tools during this time to help governments manage this fiscal distress. And they provide some guidelines on 12 steps to financial fiscal aid. Kim and I have been reviewing it, and we're kind of comparing based on their guidance. We're looking at how we fall into those parameters. We're not there yet as far as certain points of it, because we don't have a fiscal distress. Even though we have an external fiscal distress, we don't have an internal fiscal distress yet. But there are some parameters that we can go by to make sure that we can maintain and plan in case those fiscal distresses occur. And I think we'll probably be going over some of that when Kim does the revenue projections.
Good morning.
Good morning, Kim.
So, as Steve said, we started this budget in a much different place than where we ended. I actually was on a call with Steve and Allison earlier this week, and if I had told myself at the beginning of March we would be where we would be, I wouldn't have believed it. Between reassessment, the possibility of it getting deferred, and the decision, to not do any kind of tax increase, I think I would like to commend department heads for the work that they did put in. I'm sure some of the feeling is that that work was in vain, but we're taking steps with them to make sure that we review the information that they submitted to us as part of the budget request process. And we're basically asking them to hold on to their information until the following fiscal year, and hopefully we'll be in a different position at that time. I would like to really quick just thank council for including that budget analyst position for the current fiscal year. If I did not have that individual helping me, I don't think that I would have been able to stick to a timeline with how fast everything changed. He has really been an asset for me and has helped me get through this process this year. So without further ado, just getting into the revenue really quick. So we can recognize that we are in a situation the likes of which no one has seen in this lifetime. We are following state and national guidance that we're receiving. We have taken a look back at the 2007 to 2009 numbers that we collected, and although we've been told you cannot fully compare what's happening now to what happened then, we're trying to combine that historic data with the information that we're receiving at the local level. So there's not a millage increase as was stated, but we have increased some of the tax revenues based on growth projections from the assessor's office. That being said, I decreased the collections rate on that back to more what we got in 2007 to 2009. But just for y'all's information, we never went lower than 94% collections in our property taxes even during that time. I think the lowest year was 2008, and it didn't even quite hit 94%, but I am using 94% as my number. We are increasing delinquent tax due to that decrease in collections and the projection of what we'll collect there. And of course, that can be split between multiple years. So, you know, we may see a higher collection there as well in 2022, fiscal year 2022. In terms of the local option, the lost revenue, you'll see that that is projected to increase, and that's due to the delay. Where the state has said that those quarterly payments will be delayed, so I think we'll receive some of the money for this year in next fiscal year. And so we've tried to account for that there as best as we could. In terms of state funding, we've basically left that the same. Not a whole lot of change there. Obviously, it's not going to increase at this time because the state is also dealing with their own issues, but we'll just have to monitor that and see where those numbers end up going. Fortunately, council has done a good job in establishing those fund balance policies, which allows us financial security in difficult times like this. However, we have been dipping into that the last couple years for the capital projects that we've been working on, and we've committed a lot of that funding to those projects. So we are, based on my current projections, we are right around 29% based on this current budget, and our policy is to be between 28 to 32% of budget. So we still have some committed in the budget, and I've taken that out of that number, but just keep that in mind for next year. I am projecting some growth based on where we are with current expenses and current revenue, but I've accounted for that in that figure. So we will not have what we have had for extra projects. Now, of course, if we get in an emergency situation, we are authorized per our policy to go below that 28%, but it will make FY 2022 difficult because then Steve and I have to come up with a plan to get us back above that amount. So I'm going to be watching that very closely, and I'll be updating admin committee and full council as necessary, but I did want to kind of give y'all that update because I know we haven't had one. So what I'm projecting the fund balance to be with the growth is $20,970,900 roughly. And we are planning to use about $2.6 million in next year's budget, and so that leaves us with $18.365 in unassigned. So 28 to 32% is 17.4 to 19.9 million. So we're right in that range. I just want us to be careful with utilizing. We need to be very cautious if we proceed in utilizing any more than we've already committed to use. And that does take into account the projects that council assigned, like the EMS head and some of the projects that I know we budgeted this year, but we didn't get to or couldn't get to in time. So I've carried those forward. So I've accounted for all that in those numbers. Most of the other revenue sources that were adjusted in the budget, you'll only see minor changes. And most of those are deliberate. A lot of them are tied directly to a certain expense, so I can cover that on the expense side, and we can discuss it at that time. But do y'all have any questions for me concerning the revenue?
Any questions, Steve, Allen? Any questions? No.
Okay.
To piggyback on the revenue, there are certain revenues that are vulnerable at this time. The taxes and the hospitality tax, sales tax, things like that. So those are the type of taxes that we'll have to keep monitoring because they are vulnerable during this time.
And obviously, revenues, like, this is an easy one to pick on because it's just very obvious, but the program-based revenues such as recreation, you will see in the statements that I did not decrease that number despite we don't know when we're, because of all of the, I don't know when we're, what I would expect to see from recreation and a message that Steve is delivering to them is that they should not be spending on the expense side if the money is not coming in. So if programs are not going to be opening, then we would expect to see that on the expense side as well. And that's one of those between now and by the time y'all pass this in June, we could be in a completely different situation. Maybe we'll be back on track and ready to reopen some stuff, but, or already have it open. I don't know where we'll be at by then, but that's one of those easy things to kind of monitor and see it on both sides. Steve and I have talked about a few different things that will be that way, and department heads will be communicated the message that they need to, usually at the beginning of a fiscal year, it's new money, it's a new year, we go out and we buy all the stuff that we haven't bought in the last month of the prior fiscal year. This year the message is we all need to just kind of wait and see only by the necessities at the start of the year, just so that we make sure that we are going to be back where we need to be. And again, by the end of June, that message could be different, but for now, that's what the message is going to be. Okay, so I'll talk about the countywide. Chairwoman McGriff asked about the cost of living. So currently, the 2% cost of living is approximately $470,000 in the wages and $133,000 in the fringe, for a total of about $604,000. So if we with the deferral, when I talked to Steve about that previously, we discussed not necessarily putting a time frame on it, just to see where we stand after maybe the first quarter versus the second quarter. So that will be a constant state of review until we decide that we're prepared to implement, or to just pull it off the table, at which time we'd have to come back to council.
Now, Kim, if we decide to do it mid-year, around January, would it be half that cost?
Yes, ma'am. So basically, if we don't receive the revenues, if this hits us for a longer period of time than we're anticipating, and we're not receiving the revenues, then that would help offset that. So it's not like there would be that additional money just sitting there for us to spend on other things. This is a strategic thing that everybody can impact the savings on. So it may look like there's savings in the budget, but we want to make sure those revenues will balance out. On the other side of the fringe, as Steve indicated, the insurance did increase 6.7%. Due to adding so many positions last year, though, we had budgeted all of those at full family, so we actually had quite a bit of savings when we redid the numbers this year. So in the end, that only totaled about $60,000. But just so y'all know, we'll get hit with, that's only 7 months, so we'll get hit with the full cost in 2022.
Are you on a page, Kim?
No, I'm just talking countywide
Okay,
right now, so I
okay.
don't have to go over it in each department. So when I'm about to start on the pages, but anyway, so that increase wasn't as much as originally. We had anticipated over $100,000 for that. And then, of course, in 2022, we'll see the second half of that be picked up. So starting on page 13, under non-departmental, and I think that y'all are using these, I just did the right pages. Okay. So page 13 in your packet, most of the changes are based on the trend, and then we had a property and liability insurance increase. Most of this we cannot control, so I don't have a whole lot to say. We did bid out the audit. We're waiting on what that will come back at. There's a little bit of an increase budgeted there, where those numbers are at. Moving on to economic development.
Kim,
Yes, sir.
non-departmental 005,
Yes, sir.
what is that exactly?
It's basically, it's basically anything that is county-wide expense. It's not tied, obviously, to a specific department. A lot of local government budgets have those in it, so everything there is related to something either the state puts on us or something that would impact the full county that doesn't fit into another category, like the property and liability insurance or the direct assistance for the medical indigent fund for the state. Any other questions on that department? Okay. Economic development starts on page, I guess it would be 14. The only change in this budget, other than the cost of living and the fringe that I've already discussed, we did a transfer from building maintenance, and basically economic development will now be taking over the maintenance and landscaping at our industrial park sites. Jamie tends to be more involved in that anyway, so he just preferred it be within his budget, and there was no problem on the building maintenance side. So you'll see that in their contractual services line item.
And so this is a question I've had throughout the whole document.
Yes, sir.
When we look at wages, in 19 we spent 215,000. In 20 we budgeted 227, and we look like we're a little bit over maybe at actual at 189. And then there was a requested 248, but we recommended 246. That's a little bit more than 2%.
Madam Chair, didn't they reclassify an employee in economic development? Is that where that would be coming from?
That's this. One of the things, so the committee will be aware, is we've stolen John McCain for about 2 weeks, and that's going to carry over into the fiscal year 21. I've been talking with Jamie. It's going to be sort of an off year in economic development. He's aware of that, and John has been a great resource working with us on pandemic response, and we're going to continue to steal him. But Kim, unless I believe we still have him budgeted here, even though he's going to be working elsewhere.
Allison and I are working on that because I just found out about that this week, but that change will be made if he's not going to be, if an individual is not going to work within that department, and we know that now, we need to move them out of that department. But to answer Mr. Blackman's question, basically that would be due to a change that occurred during the fiscal year. I cannot speak to those changes, but the numbers that I'm projecting are based on whatever is in our system, so that would be more of an HR kind of a
And I
question.
think that when we reclassified some of them,
Yeah, that's
There
what
was
I,
reclassification from existing
Reclassification, 'cause it's
manager
gonna
up to
affect
deputy
the-
you know, Jamie
director.
wanted, to reclassify and put more responsibility, on employee, more marketing and,
It moved up from existing industry to deputy director.
Cause I asked Steve that very same question yesterday, and I think it's the reclassification. It's gotta be, I couldn't figure out the change.
Yeah,
other
that,
than-
that would be it. If we changed the position, that would be what it was. Now, on the requested side, although we tried to go back and fix this, we worked with so many different numbers this budget, they may be off from what was recommended. I usually try to have the two be the same because the department, unless the department heads requested something special. But comparing year to year, we're just pulling what's in the system. So I wouldn't have the specific information off the top of my head, but that if a position was reclassified, that would be the case. Now, something that has gone on that I do want y'all to be aware of since the question has come up, if you recall in this fiscal year, the budget passed kind of before the compensation plan of council did. So you may even see where it looks like budgets didn't go up as much as they were supposed to. Well, that's because we didn't implement the full cost for everyone was a little different. Some there was savings, some it cost more to we ended up doing, but it all evened out. So you may see that in other departments where they had a lot of staff that was supposed to go much higher than what we ended up doing. So just keep that in mind as you're going through. The numbers between this year and what's projected for next year may not match up.
And I noticed a lot of times you recommended more than they requested. So,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions, Alan? Okay.
All right. Council's budget includes a $1,000 increase for council members.
What page are you on?
Oh, I'm sorry. 16. Sorry, my numbers are cut off. Yeah, the part-time line item has a $1,000 increase for council members on page 16. On page 17, we did increase the hospital security, as Steve stated in his opening statement. That is based on actual numbers. Last fiscal year, you can see that now there were other things budgeted, but you can see in your packet that that was over $1 million. I think 870,000 of that was the hospital security. This year, we're already about to be, or we are already over budget, and that most of that is related to the hospital security. And a lot of the issue with that is we will not get. Sometimes they can get very behind in what they're billing us, so it's been difficult to project because we'll get 3 bills after the fiscal year ends. But I think if we can at least start to move in the direction of increasing that, I know that's a big jump, but just based on what we actually spent last fiscal year, I think that it's necessary to get that line item corrected for the future. In professional services, we've retained funding there for the strategic plan that has been deferred the last couple of years. 1 year we used it for citizen survey, and then this year we're using the funding to go towards the CIP adjustment and as part of the impact, looking at the impact fees. So I've actually increased the amount that I think that it will cost just based on conversations that I've had over the last couple years. But that's something that the budget analyst and myself will be working on putting together. I've actually already had him looking at some firms for the fall, this fall. There is some literature out there right now and doing research that it may not be the best time to do a strategic plan because of everything going on with COVID-19. So it's something for us to consider. It's in fund balance. If we don't end up using it, then it'll just stay in fund balance. So I did want to make council aware of that. This change in the special projects account, the 690, we removed $1 million for the Barnett building renovation, as that should be coming to completion by the end of this fiscal year. We have, however, included funding for the DSS grant match, and that is $565,000 of that. The remaining balances that in that account is just a continuing funding source for special projects within the administration and council departments.
Kim,
Yes, sir.
If I could, before we move off that, just make sure the admin committee is aware, we're working with, Grazier at the COG. She's, of course, working with Commerce. We recently became aware when the DSS notified us, the 60% match that they would normally reimburse us will not be forthcoming. Presume that's due to state budget cuts. I don't know. DSS just said, no, not getting the money. So we have trimmed the scope of the project significantly. At this point, what we're looking at is doing the building envelope, mechanicals, electrical, plumbing, things of that nature. Got to be done. There'll be some ADA changes that we have to make to bring the building up to code. Other than that, since DSS financial participation has stopped, we're stopping. I've talked to Nakia. She's grateful to have the additional space. That was one thing. But some of the things we were looking at, for example, moving walls and changing, design spaces and all that, we're simply going to hold off for now. So we're going to have some cost savings. We're not going to be using an architect for that.
So what's the budgeted amount now?
We're still working on that with Grazier, but I think it's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $500,000 with the CDBG and approximately $200,000 to $250,000 with local funding. And then at some point, if the state funding ever comes back, we can always go back and renovate interior spaces later. Not a problem. But if we have the building envelope taken care of, good mechanicals, basically good bones on the building, we'll be in great shape later on to make changes. But in the meantime, DSS still has a lot of space, and talking with Nakia, she'd love to have everything, but she understands if the state funding's gone, there's a limit to what we can do.
So how much did we reduce that budget by?
At this point, we haven't, because again, we're waiting on information.
I mean, we had a total budget for that, did we not?
Yes, ma'am, 556. I think we're going to spend about 250, but I've got to get approval from Commerce to revise the scope of the grant.
Yeah, okay.
So we're working on that, but we just became aware either last week or week before that when DSS said, we need to let you know, state funding's gone.
Wow. Okay.
Any other questions on that?
No.
You'll see in a couple line items below that in the land/building acquisition that there's been a large sum removed. That was for the Lennar property, and obviously that will be taken care of before June 30th, so nothing for that. On the grant match account, we had a budget amendment in October that included funding for, we did a grant for Old Bales Road, and there was a $400,000 match associated with that. Oh, I'm sorry, higher than that. No, 400, that's correct. And so we have carried that forward using fund, that's a fund balance item, so basically that carry forward will go into next fiscal year. Other than that, I did want to note on the next page, page 18, the 10-9-011-950-05 transfer to other funds. I do not currently have the transfer in there to the bond fund for the EMS HQ. I know y'all are still working on passing that, I think, third reading, yeah, on getting that through. The transfer I plan to take care of in next fiscal year. We have budgeted the money in this fiscal year, but it's not in the right type of account because originally we were going to spend it out of the general fund. So now what we'll be doing is transferring that to the bond fund, and all the expenses will be out of that. So I'll take care of that as part of next fiscal year's budget, deducting out any expenses that happened since y'all passed that budget amendment in the fall. So that will change by the time first reading happens. I probably won't change it for full council, but I'll note it there as well. Any questions on any of that?
No.
Okay. On page 19, I think, for council transfers, obviously as we went through last year, recreation now falls in the general fund, so that's got nothing there. We'll be prepared to deactivate that account. Airport, it went up a little bit, but that's just based on cost of living expenses, as well as some utility increases and that sort of thing, nothing major, so.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
If I could, before, and Kim will probably cover this when we get to the airport budget, that's another one of those, she mentioned recreation, airport's another one. Back in '08, '09, we saw a tremendous drop-off in both recreational and business flying, which affected everything from fuel sales to landing fees to whatever. That's another one of those that, that department, we're gonna have to really watch based on the income that we would expect to see. And some of the capital things that they may be coming up with next year, saying we need this, that, or whether, next year the answer is probably gonna be no. Year after, we'll take a look.
On page 20, getting into the direct assistance that we give, we have recommended the slight increase in Clemson Extension for a contractual increase for their janitorial services. That was just $1,000. In Soil and Water Solicitor and Public Defender's offices, I went back to them and I basically asked them what it would cost to give their full staff cost of living, since we were not looking at career ladder adjustments this year. And so they gave me those numbers, and I have those in the budget. Obviously, if we defer ours, we would expect to defer theirs as well, so I'll need adjusted numbers from them depending on that. And then Council on Aging, we increased slightly to continue meeting the grant requirements based on cost increases. And then we added back Keystone Substance Abuse, their contribution at $10,000. And I don't know, Steve, if you want to speak more to that.
I can mention that one briefly. That is something that is a new one this year. And the sheriff's here. If he wants to make any comments, certainly can. One of the things with the opioid crisis that they've been looking for is whenever you have an addict that's saying, I need some help and I need it now, if it's 3 in the morning, you got to have some place that you can say, at 3 in the morning, we'll get you some help. The sheriff has worked with Keystone. They have an agreement. They are working with him on that, and part of that agreement, sheriff came to me and I said I would include it in my recommended budget, is funding so that our citizens, when the sheriff takes them over there, would be able to receive services. And Barry, if you want to say anything else, that's fine. If not, that's up to you.
My question to Steve yesterday was, is this a service that counseling services could provide? And you want to explain that, why are we going outside of it?
Counseling services, they're great, but they don't do inpatient type activities. They do outpatient. They do a fantastic job with counseling. But what Barry was needing was somebody actually needs a bed space. Keystone could provide that.
And I think
Where's Keystone located?
Rock Hill.
Rock Hill. And the reason why I wanted Steve to explain is if anybody asks us why are we funding anybody outside of the county, so we'll have an explanation for that. Okay.
On page 22, procurement starts. The only major change in this budget is on page 22, and that is under maintenance service agreements. We, in the current fiscal year, as part of the COVID-19 response, did fund money for them to obtain a vendor registry software to get more of their information online, and so there will be an annual fee associated with that, and that has been budgeted. Any questions on procurement? Page 24, the administrator's budget. I will note here the salaries decreased overall because we removed we transferred the development services director position in with the planning department, and it was previously housed here. Other than that, it only contains the cost of living adjustment for the rest of staff. In the contractual services,
It looks like we didn't drop it down a whole lot. That position.
we only did a half-year funding on that. Sorry, I forgot that. So
Good answer.
So we did January forward. that is important to note. But yes, only a half-year funding on that position. The only other major change in this budget is on page 25 under contractual services. We will be funding $12,000 for new brochures, but I am recommending that come out of local accommodations tax money because it falls under that purpose, and we do have some available funding there. So the funding is available for that, but it will be in another fund.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Willis, you know, we're doing our meetings and we appreciate the fire service doing this, but this is gotta be short term because they have other jobs.
Oh, yes, sir.
How are we gonna address recording these meetings? I see we have the public information officer, and it's not in this budget, which I understand, but what are the
Part of that's what we're stealing the economic development position for. But Allison, if you want to speak about the plans, we do have long-term plans. This is a portable setup. We're looking at a permanent solution to start streaming council meetings permanently in the future.
Yeah, so currently we've reached out to vendors to provide us quotes on installing a permanent camera system and recording system in this room. No installers are coming out to actually look at systems at the moment. So Mr. Lloyd knows that he's in it for several months to help us record and stream the meetings. But we know he's not going to do this.
we appreciate it,
Yes.
but I know he has other responsibilities.
Okay. That's it.
Any other questions on that? I think that was it in terms of major changes for administrator. So I'll move in to legal, which will be very quick because we have no there. Still continuing to use contracted services. You'll see we previously had a position funded there, but we're going to continue on as we've been for the last couple years. In finance, there was no major changes. Veronica did have some internal transfers, but other than that, there were no changes. So page 30.
Wait, but again, on salaries, and this is gonna be a common theme of mine, is, so we're going to 452 from a budgeted 431. 21,000 increase. Veronica, you want me to just shut up?
No. I think there were some changes with division directors, when we hired some other, when we made a change with, another position. And Ms. McGriff, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you ought to know too.
Tell me later.
Okay.
Ms. McGriff will tell me later, thank you. Take me out back and spank me. Thank you.
Any others on finance? On page 30, HR starts. We will be including funding in their equipment general account for onboarding software. It should help them transition employees into our system and as they come on board. And then we have included funding for an employee holiday bonus that will be funded directly through fund balance. And I have increased that number, although we do plan to leave it at part-time staff with 20 or more hours. And all full-time staff. I know that we want to get that right. So this year, I think what I have kicked around with Lisa is after we passed it last year, just to make it clear, the state passed something kind of similar, but they had very specific language written into, I forget what their proviso, into their proviso. And so I think within the budget ordinance, we're going to do that as well this time. Is just very specific language, so there's no question. I know we discussed it and knew that that was the plan, but just so that information is in the ordinance itself. And the same thing on the cost of living. We had talked about that last year with John DeBose, and he said moving forward, he'd like the personnel plans to just be in the budget ordinance. So he can help me craft that when it comes time. But we'd like to define that very clearly, and I've kept that proviso from the state so that I know exactly how they wrote it. So it defines it defines who a full-time employee is, as well as that part-time permanent positions. That's the kind of language they
And that's
use.
for all employees over 20 hours. So what are we classified as council members? No, I'm just kidding. When I was coming in the door, they asked me, lady didn't know. She said, are you an employee? I said, I don't know.
Um,
When you count in constituent services, y'all are about 40 hours a week.
on the merit pool, we doubled it from 19 to 20. Why did we do that?
Where you at on what?
Oh,
Page 18?
we did increase, I think in 18, 19, it was 250, and last year we brought it up to 500. So,
Oh, no, the merit pool,
You going all the way back to page 18.
no, I know, I'm
30.
sorry, from fiscal year 2018, 2019, we had it at $250. In 2019, 2020, we brought it up to $500.
but does that also include,
Where's he at?
I'm on page 30, merit pool. What all's the merit pool used for?
The holiday bonus.
That's
We
all?
just, yes, we've given bonuses out of that account, before, so we've just reused that account, but that's what that's for.
What about the thumbs up?
That comes out of the administrator's budget,
Okay, all right, thank you.
in that special projects line item.
All right, thank you.
And again, I'm still working with Lisa to define that total. I went up $20,000 as a cushion just in case, but, because I don't know, this is part of that definition that I want in the ordinance is at what time period an employee will be, they've had to have been working for so many months before they get it as well. So once we get all that nailed down, I might tweak that number a little bit before it comes to full council for the first reading. All right, that's it for HR. Any other questions on that?
What is this, is this new software?
It's NeoGov, it's onboarding software. It also will help Lisa with her tracking for the state requirements, EEOC reporting, things of that nature. But right now, we've just grown to the point that the individual file folders in the file cabinet just isn't working for HR.
Okay.
Risk management begins on 32. There were no significant changes there. Very small budget. So if y'all don't have any concerns, I'll just move on to MIS or IT on page 33. So during this fiscal year, the wages did increase because we transferred a position from EMS into IT's budget, so that is reflected for the first time in the FY 2021 budget. The only other change within that department, well, major change on the next page, on page 34, we fund replacement money for end-of-life workstations and technology. Not at the amount originally requested, but Devin said that he thinks that he'll be able to replace most of it, just possibly at a lower quality level for that $95,000. And then the software maintenance line item decreased due to removing one-time funding for the Microsoft licensing. I don't know if y'all remember that, but we had about $80,000 in there this year because we had a Microsoft audit and needed to get some licensing on some of our computers. So
We got legal.
yeah.
Members of the committee,
Talking to Mr. Blackman one time, he mentioned when he worked for the state, they had IT audits. You
Well,
know,
no, I mean,
Or how did that work?
Unfortunately, the Department of Revenue was very remiss in their duties, but working in the private sector, there's a corporation that actually has outside vendor that comes in and tests the security of our IT systems. And, they make sure that, we can't, where the weaknesses in being hacked and things of that nature. Do we have anything like that going on in IT?
Yes. I don't know about the outside vendors, but we work with the state. Trying to think, the acronym ISAC is some, it basically, because we're part of the SLED system, so we have to meet their security requirements. Since we have the sheriff's office and all that tied in on our email, we meet that system-wide. But
So it's like an audit. It's like an IT audit.
I don't know if I just don't know what an IT audit is, but periodically SLED will come in, they examine our policies, they take a look at how the system's set up.
Security measures on
Gary,
the system.
Because you deal with that all the time. I know periodically they come in.
Before and after the hack of the DOR system and 1.3 million citizens' information was compromised, we were under review by the IRS to come in and check our systems for security. Never got picked up. And there was some very, very basic things, I'll just say, that weren't being done by the Department of Revenue. The IRS didn't know that wasn't being done, and they're trying to make sure, because they share federal data with us, that we were protecting it and things of that nature. The hack may not have gotten federal files and federal data, but it did get the state files and like I say, 1.3 million individuals' Social Security numbers and other information was compromised. So I don't know. I just think it's something we might need to explore, talk to other counties about to see if they're doing anything from an outside, true independent service to just make sure we're as safe as we can be.
It's worth asking because certainly, we want to know that we're doing what we need to do in securing our IT department and our files and finances and safety measures.
The county did have an external security audit in 2016 of its IT services. So one of the items that IT kind of in their long-range plan is before COVID-19 was to request a security position in the fiscal year 22 budget. And the idea is that you have someone who's almost like an internal auditor for your IT hardware and software who's checking behind your employees themselves. And then getting on a cycle of doing an external security audit to the same point of.
So you said was a IT audit done in 2016?
2016.
And some recommendations was made from that audit?
Yes, and we've been following that as much as we can within our budgetary constraints in terms of our servers security, our network security, all the stuff that us as end users sometimes find irritating that we can't do on our computers is a result of that security audit.
So what is recommended as far as doing IT audits every how many years?
I actually don't know what the schedule is, but I can certainly find out.
Okay.
I
And maybe
believe,
we can follow up with something along those.
We do it annually, an annual contract, and then they randomly do it. That we do not know when they're coming in.
Okay.
I believe when that was done, Devin did give a presentation in executive session on the results of that, but it was obviously in 2016. But I know he's been following it because he references it in his budget requests most of the time, what their recommendations were.
You know how technology changes every 3 months, and we're years away from that last one. So just a thought. I'm not saying we got to do it right now, especially
And I like
COVID budget. I'm not recommending doing it right now, but
And one of the things, just to give you an example of the little things that I never thought about, but even like on the administration copier, it's also a scanner.
Yeah.
And about 2 years ago when Dad passed away, I had to send a PDF of the death certificate. great. I'll just run in there, scan it to my email, and send it off. Our email server picked up, whoa, there's a social security number in here. I'll encrypt this thing and wouldn't let it go through plain. I never would have thought of that, but Devin did.
You know, I do like the fact of an outside audit because, you know, internal, you can't check behind yourself. So if we do anything, if we're gonna follow anything, I think outside audit would be in line. So Alice, will you follow up and let us know? Okay.
And Barry just texted me, said that this is part of the SC Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity Program. SCCIC, that's something to do with Isaac. So, but SLED does that, and that's part of what they do.
Okay, Kim.
Any other questions on IT's budget? On page 35, GIS starts. There have been some changes within this budget from the current fiscal year, mostly being that in 2018, 2019, we had eliminated the director's position, and we had just, I forget what the title was, but we basically added that position back in. It was previously split between this and 911 fund. Our new director, however, has experience with the 911 fund and has recommended that we do not split the position anymore, and that's partially reimbursed by the state because the time isn't with his vision for where GIS is going to be going, the time isn't going to be split a 50-50, and we obviously don't want to be getting in trouble on that end. So we're just, we made the decision to move him 100% into the general fund. And so that did free up some money in the 911 fund, which is a good thing because that revenue's been pretty stagnant anyway. So it left a little wiggle room for Stephen to work with. The only other change in the budget is on the second page, so 36. The funding for pictometry, which council funded, I think now 4 years ago, has been moved to the assessor's budget as Brad, in the interim kind of between directors, has kind of been over that contract. So that will, you'll see that reflected within his budget later on. And the funding that remains in contractual is mostly for Esri. Is it Esri?
Esri.
Yeah, okay, I thought I was, okay. And that's our software system. And that is also split with 911 funds still, because they do in communications, it's kind of a three-way split, so. Moving into development services, the zoning budget is on starts on page 37. There were no major changes on that page. On page 38, you will see $20,000 included for nuisance abatement. We talked about that at the council strategic meeting in January, and it is partially funded through an increase in our zoning revenues. I did not increase them completely to what we've been collecting, as we've been over collecting, but I did increase them about $10,000 to help cover the cost of that.
Kim, go back to wages. Again, this will be a repeated theme of mine on some of these. So we budgeted 282. We're actually at 191, which is 32% remaining, which I assume these actuals are through March 31st.
It's actually, it would be through April 22nd when I ran it.
Wow. So we got a lot remaining, but yet we increased our new recommended budget amount, 18,000.
Yeah. There's been vacancies in that department, and I think there's still one position that's vacant. And then we have our third paycheck, which would have been processed this week as well. So we have three paycheck months, and this is our second one. So, but yeah, it's mostly due to those vacancies.
Okay.
questions on zoning? All right, moving into building. We have one of the, I think one of the 5 positions budgeted there, and that is a plans examiner. That position will be directly offset with building permit revenue. And then you'll also see further down in the budget funding for commercial plan review to be outsourced. That's on the following page. That has also been funded by building permit revenue. If we don't need to spend it there, or the revenue's not coming in as we expected, then we won't. But both of those have been funded through that source. So any questions on those? I think we talked about the commercial plan review during the retreat.
Kim, one thing for the committee, just so y'all be aware, working with Rox, and since it's part of his division, one of the things we're looking at is increased efficiency as we have more mobility with our folks, and that is potentially looking at sending the vehicles actually home with the building inspectors. And rather than them having to come all the way here and then go all the way back out for their inspections, if we have that IT capability and the mobility, everything will be on their computer. They will leave from home and actually go to their first job site. They won't necessarily have to come into the building every day like they are now, maybe once, twice a week. That's something we'll be rolling out probably during this coming fiscal year.
So technology is great. I go on my phone, schedule an inspection. You can, I haven't did it yet, but you apply for a building permit online. In the communication between there's always been a problem between disconnect with the county, getting information to the power companies. All that now is going directly to Lynch's River or Duke Power, and it's wonderful. I mean, it's still got a few kinks, but I think from what I saw, it's real helpful.
But as far as the inspectors taking the vehicles home, I'm not opposed to that in principle. But if we have one that, or if they all live in Indian land and they're making inspections down toward Heat Springs, we got to interject that common sense that those guys aren't going to be able to take those vehicles home and commute.
They rotate inspectors down here every 3 months that live in this area. So
again, as long as they live in the area, I think taking home's great. It's a benefit to
I think
them.
that's the way it is.
They don't want to get the inspectors too friendly with the builders. They try to keep fresh eyes.
Yep.
Kind of like we do with the audit. Veronica always makes sure it may be the same firm, but there's a different team in, so there's no possibility of the auditors getting overly friendly and overlooking something.
I understand rotation. My point was just simply, we don't want to get extreme with inspectors living in Indian land going to Heat Springs directly, and so they're basically commuting in our vehicle. As long as they live in the general vicinity and they rotate around, I'm glad for them to take it home. I think it's a good benefit for them, good benefit for us.
As time moves on, we have some things going on, but in general, it's not a problem with folks having to go to do inspections in the southern end of the county. So
because our vehicles have tracking devices on them anyway, don't they?
some of them did. We kind of moved away from that simply because of the cost.
Okay, Kim.
I'm just going to move right into planning. Full-time wages, it's a full year of the services director position. As I covered for a half year in this current fiscal year. Any questions on that? No? Maybe? Okay. Contractual services includes funding for RFATs and technical assistance or all on-call services. We pretty much have had that in the budget, but we did split some things out to make it a little bit easier. with Rox having several different things coming out of the contractual services. So we created a line item specifically for traffic impact analysis or analyses, and that has a direct revenue link because we have that in the fee schedule as a reimbursement of costs. So we set it at 50,000. We didn't come that close this year, but obviously we won't be spending that money unless we can get a reimbursement for it. So. And then in our special projects line item, we have $250,000 for the comp plan update that was deferred from this year. It also includes $8,000 for public engagement as part of that, and those two things will be funded through fund balance. And then advertising includes funding for 2 public hearings as discussed during the current fiscal year, and that will also be offset by fee revenue. I think we increased some fees to cover that cost. Any questions on that budget? All right. The assessor includes some small minor changes for software contract increases under their maintenance service agreement line item. Their contractual services has that cost of the pictometry budget that was transferred from GIS. And then you'll see on page 44 that special projects, while we are deferring reassessment in the current year, we will still have some cost of mailing. So Brad has given me an updated request from his original amount. So I think he originally had requested 50,000 with that deferral. He said for the mailings, which will go out I think partially in June and partially in July of next year, we'll have to split the cost between the 2 years for that. So that's what that 38,000 is for.
Going back to salaries and wages, so we jumped up 12,000, but there's nothing new there.
I can look into that one. We did do an additional funding this year for some certification increases. In their wages, I don't know if y'all remember that, but Brad came and gave a presentation last year about some of his appraisers meeting some certification requirements. So I don't know if that's possibly impacting it, but I can go back and look at that.
Okay. And then one more thing on travel, training, and dues. Again, we budgeted this year 21.5. They've only spent 8,500. You know,
The assessors are required to attend state training, and they were canceled. Most of it's like in the springtime and summertime, so they were canceled due to COVID-19.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions on that? Okay, on page 45, the auditor's budget starts. We had no major changes there. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. Page 44, the treasurer's budget. There's a note missing there. That request was not funded, so on the full-time wages, the only thing that's in that budget is the cost of living increase. And I will have to come back in and adjust this a little bit for the software contract. I think that the initial draft of that just came through. There's going to be some increases, and that's funded in the contractual services printing budget on page 48. I think, yes, that CS-printing. So I'm going to have to come back in and adjust that number up a little bit to account for that.
Just had a 3% increase, just came in last week.
Yeah. If there's nothing on the treasurer, moving into delinquent tax, starting on page 49. All the changes in this budget are related to transferring the records division, which was previously under the Register of Deeds budget, under delinquent tax. That was a change made within the current fiscal year. So that included a position. There was also an increase in, as part of that in supplies, training, contractual equipment, professional services, and lease copiers. You will see in ROD, some of it was offset and some of it wasn't because there's a position that was added in that budget back that will be working specifically within the ROD department.
Kim, I may have missed this, but under travel, training, and dues, requested merging of records and delinquent tax. What does that mean?
It's, so records management was under the Register of Deeds budget. This year, it moved out from Register of Deeds when we did that we did a hiring right in July, I think. So we moved records out from Register of Deeds and put it under delinquent tax.
Are those records the deeds and mortgages and flats?
It is,
I explained this during the strategic session. Lee is now over records, but it's the county records. We do have some judgments down, it's in the basement.
Okay, thank you.
no, Brittany is holding tight onto her records. On page 52, elections begins. So on page, on page 52, yes. Increased supplies, I almost said page 40. Increased supplies for $24,000 for ballot cards and other supplies needed for that's all related to those new machines and the general election in November. We also have included funding in the equipment general line item on the next page that's $20,000. Basically, we're leaving that in there for unforeseen costs. Right now, we don't know. I probably will transfer that to a special projects line item for more flexibility. We don't know what's going to happen with the mailing versus in-person voting and that sort of thing by November. So we did include a little bit additional just in case. Also with the new machines, I think Mary Ann would feel comfortable if there was just a little bit of contingency money there. We did supply some money in equipment capitalized for 2 backup scanners and 4 backup machines, and that was about $25,500. And then we've increased advertising to share public information related to the elections.
And just so council be aware, the reason we're looking at adding some machines, when the state bought the machines, they bought just enough to send out to all the precincts. They didn't buy any spares. And when they sent the machines out the first time, they had 2 that had never been out before that didn't work, and they had to go back. So one of the things we're looking at is trying to, over time, build up some cash of spares. So literally on election day, when you plug something in that doesn't work, we've got something to send out.
So if we had X number of machines, they send us less than our X number we had of old machines?
They sent us less than what we turned in, because they sent just enough for the active precincts, nothing for growth and nothing for backup.
Sounds like the state, doesn't it?
It's right, that's the state for you.
Something when Mary Ann met with us that she mentioned was basically lessons learned from when they gave us machines before. We never budgeted funding for backups or to change them out or anything like that, and then the cost got so great, and the state was never going to help us with that. So we would like this to she has recommended that this continues, just so that we make sure that we don't get in a situation like that again. So better to spend the money and have it be a little bit phased out than to get a large amount that we're going to need in a few years. Any other questions on elections? So Register of Deeds does include funding for a, you'll see the line item really didn't change. It actually decreased just a little bit because we did transfer that position under delinquent tax, but we added another one back, and that is a recording specialist. That position is funded through Register of Deeds fees. Those have consistently been over budget. And while we did increase the line item, I was still conservative in doing so. It's not increased to the amount that we've been collecting, and even in last fiscal year's budget. So in case we do see a downturn, although they were getting a significant number of refis, so I think that the revenue will hold steady to fund the position, but we're going to be monitoring that. And then, of course, the necessary funding related to that position is included throughout in terms of the operations. And then on our contractual services line item on page 55, there was a slight increase, and that's just due to including funding for the ongoing maintenance of the database for the was done this current fiscal year. Are we currently working on it still? It's done.
So we started working on the scanning and digitizing this fiscal year, and I remember that at some point in time in my feeble memory, but I thought we were going to, based on our retreat, do it this coming fiscal year had we not had COVID. But did we start it early for a reason? Did I miss something? We just had excess funds?
We started early, and what it was an effort, not only in register of deeds, but other departments. How do we continue to maintain services when the building's shut down? And by moving it online, what we're looking at, when the second wave hits or whatever, nobody will need to actually physically come to the register of deeds to do anything between e-filing and all the records being online, whether you're doing a title search or whether you're bringing something new in. You don't actually, you could still come over here and hand it in if you wanted to, but you don't have to set foot in this building to handle anything moving forward. I moved it up because it was part of our response, and to be honest, I'm hoping I can get the federal government to pay for it.
Yeah, and I'm glad you did. So will the scanning and digitizing of records be completed? Meaning, you look down that room, and some of that stuff, those binders are so old.
It's done.
It's done?
It's done. What we have now is they've got to go through, they've got to get everything in order. And Veronica can probably speak to this better than I can. As part of that, they're also, some of the real old stuff, they're going through and enhancing the image.
Yeah, he's correct. They're enhancing. So it's done as far as coming on site. That part is done. They did it in about 7 days. The images have to be enhanced, and then it has to be indexed. So that's going to take several months to get that done.
So by the end of this fiscal year, the need for that project that was given to us is going to be completed. I'm glad. I think.
What fiscal year did you say? The end of which fiscal year?
Well, you said a couple more months to enhance and all that. So a couple more months will be toward the end of this fiscal year. So all I'm asking, and I love the project. I'm glad we're doing it. And if we had not done it, I'd be arguing to do it this next year. So I'm just asking. So I guess it'll all be completed probably by the end of just in generalities, by the end of the fiscal year.
It'll be next fiscal year. It'll be during next fiscal year. Now, we will be able to provide some type of imaging to the public, but it won't be the final images.
Okay.
So
So at the end of 3 or 4 months into the next fiscal year, we'll be finished, maybe.
somewhere, probably, hopefully by the fall.
Yeah. Good. I'm happy. I'm great. I just wanted to know, just out of curiosity, because I know those records needed help.
Yeah. It's a long process. You're talking about a
Sure.
lot of images, and what we hope to do is provide a short-term portal, but the problem is we can only have so many licenses. So Brittany's trying to work with the scanning company to get us more licenses so we can open up a little bit more, but it's not going to be the final images
Great.
in the short term.
All right, Kim, before we move on to circuit court, we're gonna take a 10-minute break. It's 10:49, we'll come back at 11 o'clock, okay? Is that all right with you, sir?
Okay, this department didn't have any major changes to speak of, so I'm actually gonna kind of pass through that one and move on to 063 Clerk of Court that starts on page 57. In terms of major changes within this department, on the second page of it, we have recommended under capital equipment funding for courtroom A to get AV upgrades. Originally, he had requested for several courtrooms, but being that fund balance is a little tighter, we're only recommending one. I asked him to prioritize which one he'd want done first, so courtroom A was the one he settled on. And he gave a presentation about this in January. And so that is $173,000 coming from fund balance.
And one more look at wages, please.
Yeah.
So they actually requested 232 and we bumped it to 243.
So the 232 was what the current year budget was, so with the cost of living in there is why it's at 243.
A little bigger than 2%.
I can look back at why that would be. Any other questions on that one? All right. Family court had no major changes. I can look at that one too if you want me to. Okay.
Please.
Any other questions on family court?
See, and even family courts, so you got 38% remaining. It look like they're not spending all their money, but
Yeah, he has a vacancy that he was trying to decide whether or not he was going to pull permanently. But I haven't gotten a response from him on whether or not we're going to do that due to they've put some stuff online now that so he hadn't decided if he needed to fill it yet. So if I get an answer from him in time for first reading, I'll pull that position out.
You remember when I think the child support alimony moved to Columbia, he had a position for that. The question was asked, what are you gonna do with that extra money? He said he was gonna try to budget it. It may have something to do with that.
I think that it does. He has already eliminated a vacancy before, but I'm not sure it's related to the child support, but he was looking at doing it with another position, the more that the state put online. So I think it's within this budget that it's just remained vacant while he was deliberating about that. So I'll check back with him to see if that's where he wants that, if he's ready to make the decision to pull it permanently or not.
Before we get into the coroner, the next one, this is one I want to point out. You're going to see this throughout, some of the budget. There's some positions that are really, really needed. With the funding situation, we just couldn't do it this year. We're definitely going to have to look at it next year. And coroner is one in particular, particularly with the workload they're doing now.
The major change on this department is on page 62 in the professional services medical line item. Carla actually did not request an increase, but due to the trend of what it's been doing, we've been steadily increasing that. Their caseload is just so big, and they have to keep using outside expertise, I guess, on some of these cases. And so we bumped that to be more in line. It's been pretty steadily high. As you can see, we're already at $158,000, which is over budget for the current fiscal year. So I made the recommendation to increase that line item. Any questions on the coroner's budget? Okay. Moving on to probate court. The only change in this budget is on page 65 in the maintenance service agreement. We did fund them to get off current fiscal year. We funded I think roughly $5,000 for the annual cost, but it's actually gonna be dollars, so that's why we've increased that line item, for the annual maintenance cost on that to 11,880. Any questions on probate court?
Steve, I think this also is another agency, just like the coroner, that's
Yes, sir.
really behind the 8 ball as far as personnel.
Yes, sir, they are. And as well as some of the things that just, it's not necessarily, it would be online because a lot of their records can't go online, but just records preservation where they're doing microfilm and all that. We really need to look at that next year.
The next department is the magistrates court. There were no major changes in this budget. I will say on the wages, if you'll recall, we had some changes with the number of constables in the current year's budget. We budgeted those at what the minimum salary for those positions would be, but in order to actually get the people on board, we did have to bump those. Steve, you can speak to that if you want to, but we did bump those higher than what the budget had, which was a very base amount, more like what we pay someone starting off as a deputy, and we have some retirees over there, so that's what went on there. Any other questions on magistrates? Okay, the sheriff's office.
And who is the sheriff, by the way? Just asking.
I'm sure he'll be coming up to the podium. In full-time wages, we did fund the community opioid deputy and DUI enforcement deputy. Both of those are coming off of grants in next fiscal year. We've also included a match in that line item. They received notice that grant for 2 victims advocate, while they would include funding for it, it was being decreased 18%. And so we had to take on part of the salaries in that line item. And then additionally, we have moved 25% of the victim advocate wages from the victims Fund 13, due to declining revenues. We've made some other changes in that fund, but it was time to start moving wages. There's really nothing else that can be moved within that fund other than the salary, so that's why that change was made. We did increase the overtime budget $25,000 just based on the current trend. They've had some staffing issues as well, which is causing current staff to have to work significant amounts of overtime. The sex offender registry line item was increased $5,000 on page 69 at the very top, and that is to replace outdated equipment. And we've increased on that same page the law enforcement line item to replace equipment at the end of its service life. $15,000 will go towards body cameras, and $5,000 will go for patrol rifles that were acquired from the 1033 surplus program. We've increased the vehicle maintenance line item to an adequate funding level based on our projections. Equipment capitalized does not have anything recommended, but the new x-ray machine that was requested, I worked with the sheriff in the current year's budget, that could be acquired through the court security fund budget. And then the maintenance service agreement line items increased $3,000 due to the records management contract increases. Any questions? That's all I had for the sheriff's office. You can skip over page 71. That's an unbudgeted for drug asset forfeitures. We keep up with that on a accounting level. On page 72, starts the contract with the town of Kershaw for the Sheriff's Department. There were no major changes to report there. The changes in wages, just for Mr. Blackman's knowledge, is due to the sheriff can transfer who he wants into that. And so sometimes if we transfer some out that I had planned in there at a lower pay, there's some changes like that. So just wanted to note that. And it could change before the fiscal year starts again. So on page 74, the detention, and let me see. So there are no major changes until page 75. The laundry line item, we increased just $1,000 due to the growing inmate population. We also increased the food and beverage supplies account, $34,000 due to an increased number of meals needing to be served. The medical line item increased almost $20,000 for the standard annual contract increase. And then on page 76, we've also removed the special projects funding that was for upgrades to we did some cell upgrades, the video surveillance system, and we changed out some doors, and it was just one-time funding. Any questions on the detention center?
No.
Okay. The school resource officer budget, right now there's no major changes. I'm currently working with the sheriff and the school district. There may be some additional money budgeted there for some part-time help on the elementary school level. The sheriff included me on an email to Brian Vaughn the other day to see if the state is directly funding that to the county versus the school district reimbursing us, so we'll need to get that straight before I include it in the budget.
And we have school resource officers in the high school and middle school, right? All of them?
Yes.
Let me ask you, you said that they're going to determine whether to put that resource officer in the state budget or the local budget.
It's more the reimbursement, who's going to be reimbursing us. They're talking about the state possibly giving us directly the money versus the school district the money and then the school district giving us the money. So that's just got to be sorted out because of the way we budget it. But
So how's it done now?
the school district gives us.
Direct, okay.
But they pay the salary, and I think, we pay for the equipment.
Right. So we will have to work that part out because these would be two additional. So we'll have to work out the equipment part on the county side.
And is it in the budget already?
No, I just learned about it this week, and once Barry and I started talking about the school resource officers.
Okay.
So that may change before first reading.
Okay.
Communication starts on page 78. So the part-time line item increased by $31,000. Stephen actually had savings in contractual services and his maintenance line items for the new radio system. And so he requested that we transfer it up to cover the cost of his part-time increase. We've been using part-time staff to help him cover the number of vacancies that he has had in full-time because he's had a lot. I believe council's already aware of that. We also increased the gasoline item so the radio technician can get around as much as he needs to. And then, like I said, on page 79, you can see in the maintenance general and the contractual services that those have dropped. And I think we also increased in the maintenance service agreements line item, but that was just transferring money around as well. Any questions on that budget? Okay. Emergency management, no major changes, no requests within that budget. Any questions on that?
This would be EMS, right?
I'm,
Emergency management.
Oh, okay, okay, thank you. Thank you.
I do want to make the admin committee aware, one thing I've talked to Darren about is going ahead and replenishing the personal protective equipment stockpile that we had. Where council granted us $40,000 several years ago when we had the, potential for an Ebola outbreak. The material was saved, and I think everybody's aware of the issues everybody's had getting personal protective equipment. Having our own stockpile really saved us, and we're going to replenish that and make sure that we have that. Emergency management, fire rescue, working with EMS, will rotate items in and out, so we always have, a stockpile, so that should something happen and all of a sudden you can't get this material, we'll have it.
Should we not up, a line item in the budget for next year for that too?
Well, what'll happen is once we get the stockpile replenished, just the regular materials and supplies, as new material supplies come in, it goes into the stockpile. Some of the older stuff comes out that's still within date. So you're just constantly rotating your stock.
So you're gonna build up under this current fiscal year then?
Yes, we've got some that we utilize this event that we've got to build back up.
But I mean,
again,
you've got the money this current year to build it back up?
and
Okay.
hopefully, like I said, that's one of those we're tracking. Veronica has set up, gosh, what, 2 or 3 hurricanes ago, an outstanding tracking system so we can track for FEMA reimbursement.
I still would encourage you to look at, stocking up on maybe some, testing for our own county employees, because I just don't know that we're gonna get enough help out of the hospital, that we're gonna, not that they're not gonna want to, but I just don't think we're gonna get enough help, and we're gonna have to.
Are we equipped to do that? I mean, are we trained to do that?
Well, what you do is you buy the kits and you let the people that are trained to do it use the kits.
I'm saying, do we have trained staff to do it?
I don't know.
Okay.
But that stuff costs money, and there's a backlog to get it right now, and the backlog's just growing.
is that all on emergency management? Fire service starts on page 83. On the equipment general line item on that page, you'll see that we removed one-time funding for each station to have an additional $2,000 for equipment. That was funded out of fund balance this year in the current budget. We increased vehicle maintenance due to projections to $160,000, and gasoline similarly. And then on page 84, under general insurance, we did increase that $5,000 due to the claim that was filed in, I think, last year.
One thing I would note, next year, we really need to look at adding that $2,000 per station back into the matching funds. That really helps our volunteer fire department stretch their dollars, because the equipment is just so expensive these days, turnout gear and all that.
Moving forward, the town of Kershaw fire, there was no major changes concerning that contract. And in 144 Lancaster County firefighters, starting on page 87, there were no changes there either. Any questions on those for me before moving into EMS? So in EMS, we did include the position transfer to IT. We also increased the overtime just based on trend. This is something that I'd like to look at more moving forward, as we took a step with the salaries in that department. Not just last fiscal year, but we did a change with paramedics in a previous fiscal year as well. That would impact our overtime costs, and we really haven't been increasing that with the salary increases. So it's just something that I need to do a better job of keeping up with. So That's why I've requested that that line item be increased $60,000. There is required training and therefore required overtime that they have to do. The part-time also increased, and this does include some funding for that EMS boot camp, although the increase was higher than the $10,000 requested after the budget meeting with Clay. Just looking at what's actually being spent in that line item, it's also helping him when he has vacancies. So we looked at that again and what's being spent and bumped it a little bit higher. Personnel disease prevention includes the full request there of roughly 7.7 K due to cost increases and volume increases in the amount of supplies. They do provide those supplies to other departments like fire, and so we need to make sure that they have adequate levels there. That goes back to what Steve was just talking about with replacing some of the equipment in our stockpile. Vehicle maintenance line item was moved up to $141,000 just based on projections. And then that special projects line item, which can be found on page 91 towards the bottom, that's where we currently have the headquarters budgeted. And as I stated, we'll move that to a transfer to the bond fund and propose that for first reading within the general fund budget.
Okay, any questions? Questions, okay.
Okay, moving into public services, the road maintenance budget. We removed one-time equipment purchased in construction, pipe, and capital equipment on page 93. You can see that at the top and there in the middle. We also increased vehicle maintenance due to projections and gasoline. Similarly, the maintenance service agreement line item does include funding, which is on page 94. That includes funding for our warranties on equipment that we are going recommended be purchased out of the Fund 11 budget, our capital projects fund. And then increased contractual services line item due to transfer from the special projects line item and a full year projections of the road fee increase approved by council in the current fiscal year.
So go back to wages.
Yes, sir.
All right, let's go back to wages.
Thought so, Jeff. I just want to make sure you were okay with it, you know?
Well, but, you know, we're jumping up, you know, from 1,000,001, 40 more thousand. We budgeted you a certain amount. And so so it looks like you saved that amount by the vacancies because you're only you got 31% remaining.
So you're waiting on the answer from Jeff?
I'm waiting to ask for Kim. I know what Jeff's answer is.
He has had several vacancies in his budget. It's in terms of projections for what the number is for next fiscal year. The division director issue that Veronica mentioned would be the same for Jeff, and the change that was made during the current fiscal year with the salaries there. And other than that, I'd have to look just to be sure, but I think about 20,000 of that would be for the 2% increase, just going off of what the base was. So we could look into that.
Remember the salary study increase?
That was already taken in last year's budget.
No, it wasn't. Started that in July, after July, remember?
That would hold true on every department.
Everybody was involved. All right, Ken.
All right, and then one more question. I don't think Jeff's happy with the stone supply either. It looks like if our stone supply is kind of bedded out in individual 1/12 every month, he doesn't have much left over for this year, and then we're budgeting him at the same rate as last year. I would look like that might need to bump up.
Within the, I'm sure Jeff would love for it to bump up, but before I give it, within the current year's budget, I think we started putting those on POs. Is that correct? So he may not have spent all of that money yet. It just may be encumbered on POs at this point, that 420. We started doing that differently, than we had previously, but I don't know if you want to speak to your.
Good. And the only other thing I'm confused about is when we look at, oh, that's gasoline there. We requested 6,000 for gas for mowers and dump trucks. Okay, never mind, no question. I'm sorry. My bad.
In a different fund.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions for the roads department? Okay, moving into fleet maintenance. So this department, we just, I'm gonna skip ahead just to, page 96 really quick. The maintenance service agreement line item, what Steve was just discussing about the trackers, and that, since we didn't fully deploy it, we didn't need the money that had been budgeted there, previously for that, and since we kind of reined that back in and are doing it more strategically, basically, most of the recommendations in this budget have been funded through the transfer from that line item. So there was an increase in general supplies due to cost and usage increases on disposable items. The hand tool line item had an increase on tools for hybrid vehicles. Vehicle maintenance and gasoline, those increase, this is where the money for the administrative motor pool is. And so because the use of those vehicles has increased so much, it's costing us more, which is a good thing. We've actually, and then this fiscal year out of the capital replacement fund, we added a couple more vehicles to the pool because they were constantly checked out and people were having trouble with availability. So those have increased to cover those costs. Are there any questions on fleet?
You okay? All right, move on.
All right. Building maintenance. As I stated under economic development, we did move the industrial park maintenance under economic development, which was on page 98 in the maintenance building and grounds line item. We also decreased contractual services by $400,000. We'd been doing 2 or 3 years of one-time funding for building upgrades and renovations, but again, with fund balance depleting, that had to be removed in order to fund higher priority items. And then special projects, we've included that $25,000 for consultative services. Currently, the project manager is located within this budget, and he really, this year though we added his position, we didn't add him a whole lot of funding to work with to complete his job duties, so that will help with those preliminary estimates that we're looking for, design work, engineering costs, that sort of thing on our projects. Any question on building maintenance?
Yeah.
Page 100 is the landfill. Nothing has changed there. So page 101, solid waste.
Let's go back to, Steve, what category was that I know we said that we were going to not include the 2%, salary increase until we knew where we were at. But because Jeff is in here, and I know we talked about it at our last budget meeting, is to bring some of those, was it the convenience workers?
Convenience site workers.
Bring some of those up to where they need to be. And even if we have to delay it, in my opinion, we're still thinking about those guys. So at some point, we will bring that to council to look at bringing those salaries up, even with the 2% increase, if we're able to do that. Okay. All right, Steve. All right, Kim.
In terms of wages, the requests are not recommended at this time, and so there are no major changes on page 101. On 102, the rent, you will see kind of in the middle of the page, that's for the increase for racetrack. That's slight to $10,000. And then contractual services decreased by $360,000 due to removing one-time funding for site improvements, which Jeff has been working on in the current fiscal year. We did have to increase the disposal contract line item just based on actuals. It's been trending upward, and we don't really see it slowing down. We had kind of gotten a reprieve on that a couple years ago. We had bid it out, and it's honestly gone right back up to where it was before. And I don't know if you want to speak to that, Jeffrey.
Yes, that is a problem now and will continue to be a problem. And I know we've had somewhat of a perfect storm here lately with the COVID and trying to social distance and protect the workers. So we've, altered the hours to what we could manage. Add that in, the more people are at home, but we are pulling, I think we were averaging taking 70 tons of material per weekend to the landfill. Consistent in the last 4 weekends, we've taken about 210 tons. We've tripled. I mean, it's tripled even Christmas time tonnage. So we've gone from a bill to Mineral Mine for a month from $30,000 to about $90,000, and it's not really, dropping off. It's just a lot of things, and the growth's catching up to us. It really is. It's not just the Linwood site anymore. It's even out Rich Hill, Kershaw, the new site in Indian Finally, I know we used to talk about how it was maybe 4th in volume. It's bumped up there to 3rd now. It's a very busy site, but it's big enough to handle it, but that still means even though it's big enough, the volume's still coming in and we're having to truck it there. And also, we discussed a little earlier working on like things getting tore out, like the mattresses. Plus, with recycling dead, we never made a lot on it, being able to sell those commodities back, but we're basically getting nothing now. I mean, scrap metal is a penny a pound.
Well, I really never paid that much attention to solid waste until the last few weeks, and I participated in Linwood Drive down there, and we are going to have to look at the way we fund solids waste in our facilities. We're gonna have to upgrade. Well, the additional trash is, to me, it's a blessing in disguise. Some people are cleaning up our county.
Yes.
I
hope
know
so,
I've
anyway.
done a lot around the house and other people are. And, we don't need to be cutting back on hours, because if we cut back on hours, people are gonna dump this stuff somewhere else. And talking about the mattresses, I think at this point, we're gonna have to figure out some way to fund it through our budget. If we start trying to get people to pay $25 a mattress,
They're gonna be all
they're gonna
over
be
it.
spread from one end of this county to the other.
Yeah, it'll depend too, because, right now we are paying for mattresses. We just have it included in the inert
Yeah.
material. It's really gonna depend on what Mining Road comes up with on a charge for us. Separating them is not gonna be too hard. I mean, we would like to do that starting at the sites rather than a centralized location. I don't wanna flood Public Works out there, cause we already got tires, brush, and electronics coming out there. So, extra cans at the sites and just see how it does, but we're really just waiting on, to sit down with Mining Road and see what they're gonna come up with. That was the first way. Foxhole notified us this week as well. They said, starting Monday, we want your mattresses separate. We're still gonna take them, but we want them separate. So I don't know what Foxhole's gonna charge, but they're much higher than taking it to Mining Road, so we don't wanna, the majority of the stuff's gonna go to Mining Road, but the site up in Indian Land is just, it's more feasible to still take that to the Foxhole, even though the rate is a little bit higher. But yeah, it's just, long term, we have to look at it. We thought a few years back, really thought we were gonna have a lot of savings off rebidding the disposal contract, and we were thrilled at the rate we got, but as Kim said, with the trend, we've just lost every bit of the savings now, just in probably just growth alone.
Any other questions of, Jeff? Jeff, don't leave before, I need to talk to you about something, so don't leave. Right.
Thank you.
Other major changes for solid waste, we removed one-time funding for additional cans. And then we also removed the Rich Hill site acquisition funding. We've had that in there about 2 years, and it's still tied up in an estate. So Steve and I talked, and with no end in sight on that, we'll rebudget it when the time comes and they can reach a settlement on that. So on page 104, the animal shelter starts. This is another one of the few position changes. We have moved the part-time position to full-time. That's probably I think, other than the grant positions for the sheriff's office, this one is not funded through its own revenue source, but it needs to be there for the new shelter opening due to the size and the layout of the building. They need to have somebody at the front when people walk in, so it should help with that full-time versus part-time. We've also increased the overtime line item to $8,000. This year we hit a bit of a snag. We had invested in that trailer, and most of those events were done on the weekend, and so staff was working overtime, but the budget wasn't there for that, so Alan had requested an increase there. The general supplies increased due to the need for additional cleaning supplies at the new shelter. Medical supplies increased because of the vet contract. The vet will require additional supplies in order to complete his work. And then on page 105, the capital expense, we purchased the incinerator, and so we've removed that one-time funding for that, and that will be at the new shelter. Any additional questions on the animal shelter?
Madam Chair, before we move off the animal shelter, one thing just to make the committee aware of, we are starting the fundraising that council authorized for the FF&E for the new animal shelter. Given what's going on, my confidence level on being able to meet that fundraising goal has diminished greatly. We're still going to pursue that, but that may be some cost that we're just simply gonna have to eat, because I can't stop the furnishing fixtures and equipment without not opening the new shelter.
And how much was that?
$209,000. And to the extent we can get naming rights and contributions from corporate, we'll certainly do so. But like I said, after the last 2 months, my confidence that, we're gonna be able to meet that really decreased.
Okay.
Page 107, the health services budget, that's DHEC. Nothing has changed there. There were no requests, and that's the same for DSS funding. That is on page 108 and 109 in your packets.
Kim, we need to know, that's something we'll have to look at this coming fiscal year. Both locations are gonna have more space, so that may change next year's budget.
I think I already accommodated for that in the current year's budget because
Okay.
I wasn't sure of the time frame. So, but it may need adjustment. The Veterans Affairs budget, there's nothing recommended that was requested, but other than contract increase, but I did want to note a couple of things so that y'all are not confused. On the training budget, it was not actually increased. There's a note there that it was. That was due to a transfer because of COVID-19. They were not able to attend some out-of-state training at the end of this fiscal year, and so Robin requested that we transfer the money to special projects so that they could do some in-house work in their department, as far as I think some glass that was put up around reception and that sort of thing. So I just wanted to note that so there's no confusion. On the maintenance service agreement line item, we did increase due to shredding contract. And then special projects, we decreased due to removing one-time funding for Purple Heart signs, if y'all remember approving that we put around the entrances of the county. Recreation, the only changes on the operation side, they requested a transfer of $15,000 from their program part-time budget to the operations part-time. That somehow got confused, I guess, when they were brought into the general fund, so they just asked that be corrected. And then the utilities line item, we did increase that for the new facilities coming online, as well as the copier line item, because their printing needs have increased so that they can advertise to their participants.
Has staff at the rec department been furloughed?
We have had some part-time staff that were furloughed when we canceled the spring sports season. No full-time, no ma'am.
No full-time. Do we anticipate staff to stay at their level as of now? Or?
Hopefully, the summer's in play. Fall, hopefully, will come back. Allison, you may have some comments on that, because that's part of our reopening plan.
Some of the staff members from that department are currently not working their normal jobs. They're here in the administration building, helping voter registration, helping with enhanced cleaning, that sort of thing. And our plan is, as buildings start to reopen, facilities start to reopen, and we can start to offer programming at whatever level that looks like through recreation, that those employees will go back over there. How that will impact the furloughed employees, we don't know yet. When we would be able to bring people back, because as Kim said, if we can't offer a program, we have no duties for them to perform.
And I know a lot of parents depend on that after-school programs at the rec, and that is part-time staff, right?
Yes.
So we don't know where we're at with that.
No, I mean, at this point, we can't offer that type of programming. Same with the summer camp. A lot of parents depend on that for their child care during the summer. So if parents start to go back to work, they need to have somewhere for their children to go. But we've got to continue to follow, executive orders in terms of occupancy, and we also want to make sure kids are safe. So park staff has some plans outlined of when we're able to start to reopen, what they will do. But until we have a time frame, you know, we're just waiting.
Can we go back to salaries, wages?
This one I do know, off the top of my head. The overtime ruling changed, as of, I think, January 1. And so, we bumped specifically, I think it was the program supervisors, I think are their title. They fell below that new threshold. So in order for them to maintain exempt status, we bumped them above the new threshold within the current budget. We didn't have overtime budgeted to cover that. So that's what most of that is. I think that was several positions, and it was $3,000 to $5,000 each, so.
That's okay? You're satisfied?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm satisfied.
All right, Kim.
Okay. In their program budget, there's that $15,000 transfer. This begins on page 115 to the operations. We also did increase, even though we don't know if they'll be open or what the situation it will be there. There is an increase to the pool line item, which I am trying to locate.
115.
Oh, sorry. Yep, on 115. So I don't, as y'all know, because the issue came before you last fiscal year with the town of Kershaw, the budget really is not adequate for both of our expenses for the Lancaster pool and the Kershaw pool. So that has needed to be adjusted. You can see in the current fiscal year we'll be over budget there. So that's just to account for that. If we don't end up opening the pools, it won't be an issue, but it needs to be corrected. Any questions on that? The library budget begins on page 118.
Oh, well.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Let's go back to basketball just a minute.
Yes, sir.
On page 116.
Mm-hmm.
So we budgeted for this year 32,000. We went to 44,000 in actual. But then we go back and we budget back to 32,000. Why do we overspend in this current year?
But look at what the staff, it's gotta be a staff knowledge there, because they only requested 34, even though they actually did 43. So I'm thinking, you know, if Hal and Catherine is asked for that much, they have a reason why. What do you say?
It's their participation. So that we've been talking internally, the limit, that they don't limit their participation based on the budget. So I think moving forward, we need to start looking at doing that versus just having as many participants as possible. They have to live within the means because obviously in situations like we're in now, the revenue is not going to cover some of that expense at this point. So yes, that has been kind of an ongoing thing because we have so many people who want to participate, but the resources aren't necessarily there and the revenue is not there to cover the cost of them participating. So it is an issue.
So we have allowed them to go over budget when it comes to that.
Right. In the past, the philosophy has always been, if we have, you know, children, participants that want to play, we're going to find a way to make them play. That was one that has been a long-standing philosophy back when we had the Joint Recreation Commission. It's become apparent over the last couple of years that we're just going to have to change that philosophy. And like other locales, you know, here's our cap on what we can safely and effectively handle for this particular sport. And if we're over that cap, we'll have a waiting list.
And it's the same thing for soccer.
I know, but you know, basketball stood out really well. You know, Steve, whatever we can do safely, of course, I'm all about safety for the kids when they participate. But the philosophy you stated that we've operated under in the past, meaning we try to meet the demand as they come, I believe in that too. Now, if we can't do it safely, then we have to cut back. I'm advocating increasing the budget to accommodate these sports programs because these are our kids. And I know in basketball, we only got so many basketball courts, so we got a limit based on that. And I'm okay with that because that's all we can do. Soccer, we got a lot of soccer fields we could go over, but I'm all about increasing the budget to accommodate the kids.
One thing before we start talking about that, I probably need to get Hal and Catherine in. It's not just the fields where they're having competition, it's practice fields and a whole host of other issues that they're having to look at.
Well, but again, we had a pretty, at least in my area, I don't know about Indian Land, that would be maybe the problem area. We have a shortage of soccer fields too, and what we do is we just make do, and we coaches just say, hey, you take the big field Tuesday night, I'll get it Thursday night, or some of us will even do it on Wednesday. And for the rest of us, we just go into the outfields where there's a grassy area and put out the little plastic cones, and we'll make it work. So I think in soccer, well, even maybe in basketball, I don't think we exceeded our fields and courts. I don't think we did. So I mean, let's do talk to them about that because man, we got to invest in our children.
That's certainly something we can do when we get to the committee of the whole, talk about, but you know, the participant fees doesn't cover the cost. And particularly this coming year, I've already spoken to Hal, I'm a little concerned about how our sponsor fees are gonna do this year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one we've already identified, we've really got to watch Parks and Recreation, but when we get to committee of the whole, we can certainly be prepared to have a bigger discussion along.
Yeah, let's do that.
I agree with Mr. Blackman, cause I go back to the Clemson study we did have 2015 or 16, we underfund our rec department. I think for every public dollar that we put in it, the rec department's being asked to generate about the same amount when on average it's usually 30 to 35% of outside revenue generated from fees and for participants and sponsors. As long as it's not getting into small overruns, I would love to look at increasing because my kids played Little League ball and whatever, and you practicing anywhere you could get, and I think that's the same. That's part of it.
And that's something we could be prepared to talk about committee of the whole. The only other thing I would mention, and I really need to talk to Veronica and Kim, the budget's pretty tight. And if we start really looking at increasing some of the recreation, what do we want to cut somewhere else? Or are we just going to say, we're just going to have to suck it up and have a $500,000 increase or whatever?
You know, this is not a good year to look at, I think this year is going to be what it is. But I think we do need to have a discussion around upping our recreational budget simply because of the plans we've got down the road with, sports complex and soccer fields and things like that. That budget's going to have to be.
Madam Chairman, I think with the price of fuel and gasoline, the projected price of fuel and gasoline, that every department budget in here could probably be cut 10 to 20% on fuel for the next year, and that would way cover any
We need to
costs.
stock up on fuel, don't we? But I guess that's something we can monitor and look at to make sure that we do have a discussion on full council about that recreation.
Yeah, I'd like the committee of whole have a better discussion.
Okay, and I'm sure you're gonna have Hal and Catherine here so we can talk about it. Okay? Anything else, Kim?
Nothing for programs.
Hey, and understand that is a compliment to Hal and the rec department that they are having this participation level. I mean, that is a compliment to them to have these programs. I want to congratulate them for that.
More than we can think we can afford.
That's right.
Moving on to the library on page 118. There really weren't a whole lot of requests other than positions, which we were not able to fund. But we did include funding, for just an increase in utilities, just based off of FY 2018-2019, when these larger facilities, come online. We're gonna need additional funding there, so.
Got one question about libraries.
Yes, sir.
Travel, training, and dues in 19 was $9,400. We budgeted $4. They have spent $8, and we budgeted back again at $4. Where's that disconnect? What's going on?
Some of it, Rita does get grant money to attend her training, so it may be recorded here, and then we get reimbursed for it on the revenue side. I know I forget what it's called, but there's a program that she uses to travel for certain national training. But other than that, it would just be not living within the means of the budget, and there's been no requests for a change.
Thank you.
I do know they have some training that the state library sponsors, they pay for, and you have to attend, and things. I think that's what Kim's talking about.
Any other questions on the library? And that brings us to the end of our general fund. So before other funds, do y'all have any comments or items of discussion? Anything that you would like me to, other than the rec information and some of the other requests on the wage follow-up, do y'all have anything before committee of the whole or during committee of the whole that you want us to specifically talk about?
I know we still we don't have stormwater, they ain't got their budget in yet.
I just, at the very start of this meeting, I got the estimates from Brad on the revenue, so I should be on what that will generate next fiscal year. So I'm hoping for committee of the whole, well, I should have for committee of the whole the stormwater budget, but I do not have it.
Can you, go ahead.
Make sure we have their fund balance available too.
Yes, sir.
And can you get it to us before Friday, so we can look at it?
Yes, so I am going to work with Sherry to have any changes completed, and it will be posted with the agenda.
Okay.
And, my whole thing about wages is I just want to be very careful, whether we do the 2% or not, but that we don't slip up a number that shouldn't be upped, and then all of a sudden the department head can spend that money. I just don't want to. I don't want anything that would look unprofessional in the way we budget and the way we spend that money. That's why when I noticed these discrepancies, that's why I went back and started highlighting them, because if we are arbitrarily or erroneously upping them, then somebody can spend it, and that's not our intent. When council speaks, we want to do 2% cost of living, we want to do cost of living. We don't want somebody to say, well, there was educational promotions and money given and things of that nature. You see what I'm saying? We want it to be held, because this is going to be a tight time. And the last thing I want to do is lay people off. So the best, if we can manage this budget this year and get by, hopefully, we won't really have any furloughs. And that's where I want to make sure we're really watching this tight. Might need to furlough council, as the chairman said.
Him. Okay, what's next, Kim?
Other funds, which should be a fairly quick review. So as Council Chairman Harper mentioned, stormwater is not included at this time in your packets. Neither is debt service, capital project sales tax 2, or state accommodations tax fund. So some of those, actually the majority of them, I'll have stormwater for the May 8th meeting, but the other 3 probably will not be prepared until first reading. Debt service, I've got to get that millage certification from the auditor to prepare that. The capital project sales tax fund, Veronica and I need to finalize some projections on that one. And then state accommodations tax fund, that committee, obviously we're not we don't have one together right now, so we're working on that because we made some changes to that committee recently. Council saw that. And so probably what's going to end up being budgeted there, Veronica advertised an amount and we have accepted applications. What we're gonna have to do is have that budget just be in a line item, and then after the budget's passed, we'll have to come back to council and have y'all approve who's getting that money in a resolution. So it'll be a little bit of a later process than how we've done it in prior years. Okay, so moving into the ones that are complete, I've included the revenue pages for each. So the same rules apply for the ones with their own millage. So that's the Capital Improvement Fund, Court Security Fund, as far as the collection rate projection. So I'm not going to go through in detail those. They're following the same kind of justification as the general fund. So in capital improvement, on page 125 on the expenses, we have included funding for the sheriff's fleet replacement, 1 brush truck for fire, and both of those were the same as prior years. EMS looks like it's been reduced because if you recall, we ran into a snag in FY 2018-2019 with the ambulances. There were some back order issues, so we could not purchase them that year, so we had to fund 2 extras out of fund balance to catch up this fiscal year. And hopefully we can get that back on schedule moving forward. And then roads, there's a motor grader and 2 mowers included in the budget, and those will be offset. The costs of those will be offset using trade-ins as well. Fleet is overall reduced by one-time carry forwards from fiscal year 2019 that just the purchases didn't get completed in time to be recorded in the prior year.
Kim, you've lost me from the beginning of this discussion.
Sorry.
So we're on page 125,
Yes.
and so I think you start off with the sheriff's
I'm sorry, I forgot these don't have the department names. Okay, so the very first line item, 110,560, is the sheriff's office budget for fleet replacement. I apologize. I'm sorry. I forgot that they don't record that well. Record that way. 141, right below that is the fire. $74,000 is for a brush truck. 153 is EMS, the one below that, and that $630,000 is for 2 ambulances. That's part of our replacement program, and we've removed 2 that were carried forwards from prior fiscal years. The roads budget includes funding in that $340,000 for 2 mowers, and I'm sorry, I said, is it two trucks and 1 mower, sorry. So, and those will be offset using trade-ins. I had that backwards, thank you, Jeff. And then in the fleet replacement fund, it looks like an overall decrease, but we had a significant number of things that were ordered at the end of FY19 that got carried forward into the current year. And then in solid waste on the next page at the top, the $190,000 is a roll-off truck and cans replacements. So most of them didn't have an increase necessarily. So it just may be changing the items that we funded. I apologize. Any questions?
No. Any questions? Any questions?
Thank you.
Court mandated security, the revenue, similar to capital improvement, is on page 127 and 128. 94% collection rate is planned there. No millage increases. There were no requests here. I did have to reduce just slightly the gasoline to help balance based on projections, and other than that, there weren't any changes.
Kim, I think I saw in here on these funds our reimbursement for the homestead tax.
Still haven't gotten it.
But are we splitting that between some of these funds?
Yes. So we split it between general fund, capital improvement fund, court security, and debt service.
Would it be too hard just for the last 3 or 4 years, just say how much I just would be curious as a side note, how much have we been reimbursed each year, say, for the last 3 or 4 years? And we haven't been reimbursed for this year, but we hopefully will see 3 data points before that to see what we've done in the prior years. Would that be too hard to put together? You can just shoot me an email sometime if you want to.
All right, I can work on that. And no, we have not received it yet for this fiscal year. It may impact my projections once we get that but whatever comes in off of that gets taken out of the ad valorem line item. The two offset each other. So, any questions other than that on court mandated security? The next page, starting on 131, is our victims advocate fund. You'll see where the budget was reduced for the 25% move to the general fund under wages. I suspect we're going to have to do this again. In the future, I feel much more comfortable with $65,000 as the budgeted revenue than I think it was $75,000 in the current year. So. Any questions about that fund? Next up on 133 is the 911 fund. The tariff revenue pretty much I've kept the same. The state reimbursement we've increased just due to the amount of capital projects that we have going on there as far as updates to the CAD system. Major changes within the fund is mostly just moving money between line items, and actually overall the fund decreased for next year, and that's just due to the number of capital projects that we have going on. I think that Steve, did we finish the text to 911? And no, still working on it.
Still working on that.
Okay.
So Kim, on the
Some Comporium issues.
sorry,
I'm sorry, they hit some issues with Comporium.
on the E911 tariff, so we budgeted 195, and we've only actually gotten 103. Is that a delayed collection?
A lot of it comes in after the fiscal year, but yes, we actually looked at that, Veronica and I did, at the end of last fiscal year, because it does seem like we have had some delay in the payments. So that's something that we evaluated again when we were going through the revenue for everyone. And so I think we're going to be sending out reminders on the payment schedule to our major providers. But yeah, last year we had the same thing where at the end of the year it seemed like the funding wasn't coming in exactly right, and then we had huge payments come in. So it's becoming a trend that it seems like they're not remitting the money as fast.
So we're using kind of an accrual method of accounting for this.
Yeah. Any other questions on that?
No.
Hospitality tax. So in part of our research and evaluation, this would obviously be one of the funds that would be hit the hardest by the COVID-19 economic impact. I have recommended that the budget just remain the same. The good thing about this fund is the majority of the money is just budgeted to go into fund balance. So if we do not collect, we just will not put that amount to fund balance. We do have council approved half a position to come out of this fund in the current fiscal year. I think we'll collect enough to cover that position, and then whatever on top of that, if the economy recovers, will go into fund balance to keep building up that reserve.
Now, with this, and I'm sure it's going to affect our ability to determine how much we can borrow. Would that be delayed?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, do we know how long, a year? Or?
With everything that's hit, I would anticipate, and this is just a guess, I have not talked to Franny or Brian Nurk, conservatively 2 years.
But we should be able to take care of purchasing the property
And that's what I was
and,
gonna ask.
That's in the budget.
yeah, and design, and
So we won't have to stop that. We can move forward and purchase
it's
the
just gonna
land.
slow it down.
But actually building something up there, and like I said, I can ask Franny, but I think she's gonna be in the same boat as everybody else. It's just a guess on when do we think the hospitality industry is gonna recover, and everything I've been hearing is 2 to 3 years. And then once it's back up, we're back to the same position we were. What's your track record?
Do we have to start our track record over, or do we just add, do you know,
Remember, based upon our, with the bond, crediting people, that's a volatile revenue, the hospitality tax. So that's one of the vulnerable revenues that they're looking at. So I asked a question about, once things get back to normal, you know, how are you gonna rate these things? And they said, they'll be watching until the acute revenue has resolved itself. So there may be, like Steve said, 1 to 2 years. And I'm pretty sure based on what has happened with this recession, because remember, those revenues are tied in one source, that they're gonna be very, weary, or they're gonna really watch how they give out that money or rate those type of, those issues.
The good thing about this fund, most of it is going into fund balance, and the more that goes into fund balance, that's the least we're gonna have to ask to be bonded. So, I mean, it's just, I think it's just gonna delay everything at least a year.
so we don't have to, restart on a history 2 to 3 years?
As Steve said,
I'm sure they can look at history.
yeah,
I mean, to restart it.
Yeah, but I mean, but.
Yeah, I'm
but
sure
see,
they're gonna look at it.
If we were doing this and all of a sudden we start doing all this, and then we get back to normal, that's all gonna be weighted into how they rate how much
Yeah.
we can bond out.
and as Steve
we
said,
know-
we'll have to get with Franny to kind of give her
But just
some.
give us an update on that so we'll know, because folks do ask us, and at least we'll have some sort of answer together.
But the other part I wanna make sure we're clear on, besides just the bonding of the money, is acquiring this land when that development could go south. You know, we need to make sure we understand what's going on with that developer. If he does delay his project, and building roads and infrastructure, we don't wanna own a piece of land that's isolated. We're gonna have to pay for a road or infrastructure to get to it. I just wanna make sure we don't buy something and go, oh, now we can't do anything with it. We're gonna sit and wait.
I'm sure we'll look at all that, at least I hope we will.
I agree with Mr. Blackman, because you have to look at all the markets, and sometimes we're intermingled with some of these markets that are having some adverse effects. So we gotta be careful of that too.
Steve, you okay?
No discussion right
All
here.
right. All right, Kim.
The next fund, included in the packet on is the, CTC. We originally were talking about a possible one-time increase. That has gone away. So the budget will actually, decrease a little bit because we still haven't seen, the increase we were expecting, from the additional gas tax money. So, we budgeted at 1.4, and Jeff, do you want to speak to the project?
Some hollow road. That's it.
So that's why the majority of the money is in the state line item there.
One thing, just so the admin committee will be aware, and, you know, Veronica, Kim, Jeff are all aware as well. The state's frozen collection of the gas tax, so we're not gonna meet our revenue budget for this year. Eventually it will come in, but Veronica, I think CTC bumped it back to July, the April, May, June collection periods. So we've got a quarter that's not coming in this fiscal year, it's coming in next fiscal year. And of course, the other thing I think everybody's aware, it's not tied to price, it's tied to the number of, gallons that are pumped. But people aren't driving as much as they used to. It's really down, so when it does come back, it's not gonna come back as strong as it was. It'll take a while to build back up.
Yeah, so we got a lot of revenues that are being delayed. So, I also was on a webinar. I'm on a lot of webinars lately, dealing with cash flow. And that's one of GFOA's best practices. So they did a webinar in developing your cash flow is, your statements are very important during this time. Making sure you have enough cash to meet the most important things, which is salaries and wages and things like that, because the revenues are being delayed.
And, I have talked to Representative Newton. The state controls our, property taxes. We collect for the schools and the municipalities. And if it was up to me, I would say everybody wait till April or May to pay them, but it's not. Look at Ron, give me that. Well, I mean, the government has shut down these businesses and put our people out of work for several months. And, it's gonna be a struggle. There's gonna be a lot of delinquencies. And, I've asked, him to look into the possibility of, maybe the state could waive the penalty fees, for the 3% and the 10% up through March. But, that's up to the state. Well, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman Harper. We rely on those revenues to pay your employees.
Well, if we rely on penalties, we're in trouble.
We don't rely on them, but they are programmed in as revenue.
All right, any other questions before we move on? Kim?
Page 139, Indian Land Fire District. In the wages line item, you will notice that it increased. If council recalls, y'all did approve them hiring 3 additional full-time employees, but it wasn't until the second quarter, I believe. So that's just taking on the full year salary. Everything else they requested that the board approved was included in the recommendation. So. Any questions on that? Oh, just as an item of note, they did ask that there's a capital requested for a vehicle, and their budgeted revenue wasn't quite enough to balance the fund, so they did ask that we take that vehicle out of fund balance. So they will be using $75,000 of their fund balance for a new command vehicle. All right, on page 143, local accommodations tax fund. That revenue will be one that we watch. Fortunately, there's nothing that's currently budgeted there that we really have to do next year. I would expect that to. We've also exceeded budget already this fiscal year, so it shouldn't be a problem. But I would expect that to be declining. So we just left it stagnant. The projects that are budgeted, other than the performing arts program, is $7,000 for ag art tour, $12,000 for the county brochures, and then we have some historic courthouse updates that need to come through.
Performing arts, we haven't heard yet from the city. Obviously, it's a question, is that even going to happen next year because of the ability to social distance? We haven't heard.
Did they cancel it this past year?
I think they canceled one concert, but they had most of the concerts in before this hit.
Page 144, the airport revenue, as Steve stated earlier. That'll be something that we monitor. So far this year, I think that they'll probably hit budget, and I don't think there's any concern with the current fiscal year, but into next year, depending on the situation, we may need to modify the budget, and that's something I've already had a conversation with Jeff on, since he is the division head over the airport. The major changes within the budget were mostly related to utilities, cost of living, and required sort of increases, so mandated increases. With the licenses, permits, and fees and that sort of thing we went up on. Any questions on the airport fund?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay,
Let's look at page 144 and 146.
okay.
And being that I'm such a neophyte here, when we look at the sales of fuel, and then we look on page 146, it's the gasoline expense. I'm assuming that we take in this revenue and then we have to spend it over here, right?
So we buy it first and then we sell it.
I learned that back in Econ 101.
Yeah.
But is this way you're counting for it? So you're showing the revenues in 144 and then the cost of the goods in 146, and I'm assuming you're really not doing cost of goods sold, you're just doing gross sales versus gross purchases?
So that is the cost, to purchase the fuel outright, and then the sales is recorded on the other side.
So what worries me right now a little bit is in 19 we sold 116,000 and our cost was 102, so we netted 14. Is that Econ 101 coming through for me? Or Accounting 101? All right, but then when we look at how we budgeted, but now we're looking at our sales are 109 actual, and our purchases are 117, so we're upside down. Am I the only one that's concerned about that?
I have talked to Jeff about it. He was, I think he had a discussion with Paul about that within the last few weeks. I will say concerning last year's number and just that little bit of net that we had, there was a purchase that I don't think was done very strategically, like right at June 30th or something like that. So there was no way we could recoup that cost before the fiscal year ended. So Veronica and I just recommended to Jeff and Paul to make sure they're paying attention to their timing so that we're not purchasing before we could have any chance to recoup the money. This fiscal year, I would expect that to catch up. But again, that's a conversation about being strategic in how we're purchasing versus being able to recoup.
So what you said to me just then was we spent 14,000 the prior fiscal year, right last day. So if we were to take that purchase from that day and we sold it this year, we're really upside down. Are we watching our prices? Is that the problem? Because right now in the middle of the year, I do understand there's an inventory fluctuation. We're not doing cost of goods sold methodology, so, but that just looks like, I don't know how many gallons do we hold in the ground there?
We have Jet A and the 100 octane.
Yeah, because I can't imagine we got a real huge capacity tanks. So that's what scares me. If we had 10,000 gallon tanks, we're buying 10,000 lots, 10,000 gallon lots. Yeah, we can fluctuate, but we need to check on this one.
And then we, at the end of the year, we book whatever's left in the tank as inventory. So you don't see that part. You see that part in the financials, not on the budget side.
I think we need to look at this.
So at the end of last year, we had like a little over $37,000 worth of fuel sitting in the tank.
Yeah.
I don't think we can evaluate this until the actual end of the year, right, Veronica?
I can evaluate it right now.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that, because that's your background, Department of Revenue. But I don't think we can actually evaluate it until the end of the year where we got all actuals in.
We've had questions, just like Kim said, about what we're charging.
Madam Chairman, they're having the same concerns I've got. We just need to watch it, and Jeff needs to get on top of it and make sure we got a spread there. I don't care that we make a lot of money or little money. That's a decision that management can make.
But at least
I just
they,
don't want us to go upside
yeah,
down.
they've noticed it and they've taken notice of it, right? Okay,
Thank you.
all right. Any other questions?
When
Okay,
y'all
Ken.
get contacted by some individuals, we did not include the capital items in there, but not the year to do that.
I think this is the last one here. The Pleasant Valley Fire Protection District. I think they just requested a change in their, as far as increases go, in their overtime and part-time. Those are currently recommended. I think on the other, on page 149, there's some minor changes that they requested, and then of course we're still paying the debt service on the building on page what page 150. I will just let y'all know, I made council aware of this last year. We have been balancing this fund with fund balance now for 2 years, so they based on the changes that were made within the budgets. So again, we're balancing it with fund balance, and that is the request of the board. So I just want to note
Are
that.
these funds audited in our audit?
Yes, sir. One of the things that, we've been real clear with the board is they're using some fund balance for recurring expense, and they're saying the growth is gonna catch up, and that's fine. That's their fire protection board, that's their call, but made real clear that, they have to just cut people because we don't have the funding. They're gonna have to do that.
How much should we have to put in it?
Well, we budgeted that.
Whatever the
Look at
fee
that last
generates.
page.
I'm looking, huh?
146,000 to balance for next fiscal year.
That's what we having to put in?
That's just their fund balance. I mean, it's coming from
No,
their
how-
fund.
Oh, it's coming from their
Yeah,
fund.
it's
Fund
their
balance,
Coming from
yes.
us.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, I'm
That's a
sorry.
separate fund.
It's in and out money.
Steve, somewhere in here, there was a reference to the fire study. Now, that's been finished, right?
That's our Fitch study. You need a
How
copy?
thick a document is it? Yeah, I was just thinking about getting a copy, but I think it is.
We can get you one.
Not too much trouble.
It's about 2 years old.
10 years old?
Fitch study? Okay,
Yeah.
maybe it's about a year old.
It's gonna say it.
Man, I've never seen it, so I'm probably remiss in my duties as a councilman in understanding our fire commission and what they do.
Kim had asked, is it anything that, she needs to, have answers to by next Friday? I think it was, one of, Alan's
So
requests.
recreation was one of them, and then just some of these salaries just kind of cleaned
Anything
that
else
up.
from you, Steve, that we need to, bring attention to, Kim and Veronica before our council of the whole meeting?
We appreciate, what y'all have done with this budget, and hopefully, in 3 or 4 months, numbers will start picking back up, but I think the second and third quarters are gonna be real weak.
And I think some of those points that y'all went over with us are some of the very same points that full council will want to, go over too, but, I think I feel good about the details of it and getting the details of what's going on. How about you, Steve?
Yes, ma'am, I feel good.
Okay.
Yeah, I thank y'all for what you do. Hope we didn't badger y'all too much with our questions.
I
And
mean,
great
Alan-
answers, y'all.
Alan badgering you, too much.
Great answers to our questions. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we do appreciate, all y'all do, and, Alan, believe me, your questions are very informative, because we know your background in finances, so we appreciate all your input, and just keep us straight.
Sometimes he has the same questions I have, actually, or have already asked.
Is there any other questions that need to come before this committee? Any concerns? If not, do I have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
All in favor?
We now get a second on that?
We don't need no second.